Hey, everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we are honored to have a very special guest, a friend, and that is Jim Semivan. Welcome, Jim.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me on, James. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great having you on. And yeah, most people are going to be familiar with you here, but for people who are not familiar who Jim is, here's a little bit of background on him. Jim retired in 2007 after a 25-year career in the Central Intelligence Agency's National Clandestine Service. At the time of his retirement, he was a member of the CIA's Senior Intelligence Service. Jim served multiple overseas and domestic tours along with senior management positions in CIA headquarters. He is a recipient of the agency's Career Intelligence Medal. And nowadays, people are going to be familiar with Jim regarding To the Stars, as Jim is the co-founder of To the Stars and the vice president of operations. So, anything you want to add to that impressive resume?
That describes me pretty much.
I don't know.
I did work for the intelligence community writ large for about 12 years after I retired, though, as a consultant, independent consultant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, with that out of the way, there's so much that I have to talk to you about, Jim. We're gonna get into as much as we can. So just also to that, people listening, I think it's important to know that, Jim, that you're, other than that impressive background and your service, you're also an experiencer. So you have had an interaction with the phenomenon itself. So I mean that puts it on something of a different level, I think. So would you mind giving any kind of description or anything regarding your experience?
Yeah, I don't want to get into too much detail. And first, let me just say that, and I thank you for calling it an experience. Some people would say, like, would call it an abduction experience. I don't like or dislike that term. I think anybody wants to use a term they want to use. I mean, to describe their experience. But I call mine an experience because I don't know to this day what it meant. I only know that it was real, and it involved my wife and I. It was classic. You go to bed at night, and all of a sudden, you're being visited, and I won't get into specifics, like I said, not now, but the after effects. My wife had some serious issues after it happened. I had some physical marks on my body, and I actually have proof of them. But it was one of those things. And then it's continued on, up for about a year or two afterwards. We also had a lot of poltergeist activity going on at the place we were living. We lived in Virginia, in Alexandria, Virginia, but we lived in a neighborhood that was an old Civil War encampment, and before that, it was a Native American encampment, and so we're not quite sure everything that was going on there, but it was interesting, and it wasn't until gosh 2013, 2014 that and we had what Robert Hastings, the guy who wrote UFOs and Nukes. Robert's a great guy, and he calls it the meh response, right? You have this thing happen to you, and it just really alters everything. And then it's sort of like, you're involved in it, and you're really wild about it for like a day or two. Then you go, meh, like, what are you going to do with it? Where do you put it? And you know, who do you talk to? But it wasn't until 2014 when I ran into John Alexander at a conference. Didn't have anything to do with UFOs or anything like that, but I ran into him, and he interviewed my wife and I, and then they got in touch with Lou's program and some other people, and next thing you know, we became heavily involved in this, and you know, our blood was taken, medical records, DNA, and everything like that, and we're still part of this cohort group that's being studied. So, and that's pretty much what I'll go into with that. Eventually, all of it will come out, I'm sure, somewhere down the road. But
I hope so. You know, I do think there, in some regards, there's power to sharing your experience, especially from somebody like you who is a senior intelligence official or officer. But just one more question about that, and then
sure.
we're going to move on. Were there different types of entities?
Yeah, they weren't grays. Let's put it that way. I didn't know what they were. I mean, I can describe them. I'm not going to describe them, but when I did describe them to
Right.
certain people, you know, I better not name them because they may not want to be named, but
Okay. Yeah.
it was at CIA headquarters, and I was asked to, you know, get a conference room for about, you know, around 6-7 hours. I thought that was unusual, and I didn't know the people who were coming, and but they had as many clearances as I had, and they had a no escort badge, so that's highly unusual. So they came in. I met them at the, you know, the door of the agency, and we walked into a conference room, and we stayed there for like 6-7 hours, and they proceeded to scare the living hell out of me, and they did. It altered my life completely. But it wasn't then. It was then, you know, I described to them in much more detail, and then one of them basically said, "Oh, you ran into the," and then he gave me the name, and I had never heard of that before, and because in the intervening years, this happened around 93, maybe 92, 93. But intervening years between then and 2014, I think is when this happened. Or in between those years, I had read quite a bit about, you know, UAP and UFO and, you know, experiences and contact experiences. So I was familiar with the literature, but I was not familiar with this particular piece of information that was divulged. And, you know, some of it was unclassified, but some of it, the bulk of it was classified enough that I can't really discuss it with you here. And it was then that I, you know, got to meet Lou Elizondo when he was running ATIP, and I sort of was a little bit of an unofficial consultant for the ATIP program there for about a couple of years. And, you know, they were showing me things, and, you know, and there are other things that we were trying to work on in you know, for the government, particularly for the Navy in this particular respect. So,
And you mentioned that, well, was it at that point that you got some kind of read-in?
some kind of, I'm sorry, what?
Like read into any kind of this information? Or
Yeah, well, yeah, it wasn't read into. It was. I don't want to.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, It was read into um, the uh, the reality of the phenomenon itself. I mean, it's one thing when you read a book and people are talking about it, and it's one thing where you have an experience and you know the experience was not. You know, my wife's a clinical psychologist, so I mean, I know the difference between, you know, what a numinous state is, and, you know, what twilight is, and vivid dreaming and all this kind of stuff, and, you know, riding the mare, as I used to say. This wasn't that. It was totally different. And if you speak to people that have had this experience, they'll tell you the same thing. It's very, very real. So when you get when you get sort of, these people spoke to me about it, and they said, "Oh yeah, this stuff's real, and let me tell you more about it." And then you know, and this is all scientific. These people were scientists, right, of the highest order, and you know, associated with you know, government and defense contractors. So now it wasn't until later on that I, sort of pieced together, and I really don't want to get into that at all, about how I learned about the real program, the backbone program that's been going on for quite a while.
And just say those different things that you pieced together, and different things you were told or confirmed. Was any of it like, did any of it seem like it could be potentially positive or opportunistic, or is your sense of everything that you learned concerning?
I would say, I mean, I'm generally a very optimistic guy. I mean, I don't, I mean, people always talk about, is the phenomenon, or these NHI, non-human intelligences, are, are they in any way or shape or form an existential threat to the human race? And I would have to say no, only because they've been around for so long. And if they wanted to do anything, they would have done it already. The second thing is, I don't think, I'm pretty sure that most people, particularly in the government, don't really understand this phenomenon very well. They know it's real, and they know that it has an intention, but they're not sure what the intention is. Why the communication? Why things happen the way they happen? They have a decent idea of their capabilities, but when I say that, I mean, there's it's like a superficial understanding of both their intentions and their capabilities. They don't know the full capabilities. They don't know the real intention. So you sort of look at that, and what do you do? I remember when Lou was starting to talk about, when Lou was with To the Stars, Lou talked about, national security issues with that. And he was right, absolutely right. I mean, when you're in the intelligence business, your first order of business is protecting, the government and protecting the United States. And you have to be 100% sure that whatever you're dealing with is not a threat. And you have to find that out first. And once you find out that it is or is not a threat, you take the appropriate action. So I don't think we know for sure. I would tend to think that it's not, but there is probably 10% of what I've read and experienced points to less than a positive. I don't want to say evil or demonic, but less than a positive side to this. Jacques Vallée once commented to me. He came to my house actually at one point, and spent the day with my wife and I, and going over everything, and I had asked him, what do you think? And he said, well, I think in general it's just the phenomenon is indifferent. I mean, it's just not, one side or the other. And I think he's absolutely right. There may be times, I mean, some people have experiences. I think most people who have experienced contact experiences, or what they call abduction experiences with these non-human intelligences, it's frightening at first, but then it's also transformational to a certain extent. And if you talk to them a year later, they'll tell you it's probably one of the best experiences they ever had. Maybe their life changes for the positive. It didn't happen with me at all. I still see it as a human rights violation. And because of what happened to my wife and what happened to me. So was there a more sinister element in my experience? Possibly. I was told that by somebody who knows, said that they think there could have been a more sinister element involved. What that actually means and what that entails, I don't know. But that's why I don't disregard people who, like my friend Melinda Leslie, who had a really number of frightening experiences. And she relates those to what she calls military abductions, MILABs, and, that may be easy to dismiss for some people. I don't dismiss that at all. I know Melinda and heard her story. I find her completely believable and her story compelling. So I don't, to me, everything's up in the air. We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And there, there's different parts of that. And for me, I didn't have anything akin to an abduction. My experience, for whatever reason, seemed very positive, right? And empowering and, caring, right? Like, and I'm open to the idea that's a manipulation, right? I'm dealing with an advanced intelligence that could be doing whatever it wants, more or less. At my gut, it felt genuine. It felt like that these entities or non-human intelligence cared about us. And, I got these kind of downloaded messages, but I understand that I can't take that necessarily at face value, and that's why I like to speak to people like you and other people who have different experiences, because that's the only way we're going to be able to piece things together and begin to try to make sense of it. Which I think is that's why we need this out in the open. We need everybody working together on this, because we're not going to get anywhere if this is kept as a cover-up or the secrecy. The only way we're going to move forward on this is if everybody is working together, doing their best.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's an arrogance involved, people who've had these experiences, and, and they talk about how life transforming they are, which is wonderful. I mean, I think that's great. But to say that you understand it, I think is going a bit far.
Yeah. But Jim, I just I'm sorry to interject.
Yeah,
but I completely understand why those people do that, right? Because it's so
sure.
real to you and it happened to you. And like, there's this inclination, and it's almost subconscious, to assume that the truth just because you had the experience. I get that.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean, I believe, if people have experiences, I believe them. I absolutely
right.
believe them, and I think they're true, that they actually did indeed happen. But I think, I like to follow the maxim that, John Mack said it when he was talking about abductions. He said, I think when, all is said and done, I'm paraphrasing here. He said, I have it written down somewhere here, but, in the end, I think the most we can say about all this is that it's a mystery. And that's about as far as we should be able to go with it. And I think his reasoning was correct, because, it's I like to say we live in a blinkered universe. I mean, our brains and our senses are only able to see, we're only able to see, feel, understand so much. We only take in so much of reality. Our brains are structured in a way where we can't absorb everything that's happening in our own environment, right? You go outside, and there's so much data coming at you. There's trees and animals and bugs and other people and sky and ground, and it's teeming with life, right? And teeming with energy. But you don't think about that. You can't absorb it all. I mean, it just superficially you can, but you can't make sense of it. You can't get behind the essence of it all, because it would just be so overwhelming to you. So you have to sort of know that, when you're looking at it from a humanistic or human point of view, or anthropomorphic is probably a better word, that it's limited, and that we're stuck in this limited way, and you end up with what Whitley Strieber likes to call, you walking through a forest of hypotheses. You have all these great ideas of what it might be, but you don't really know in the end. You can't really be sure, right?
Yeah. And our senses filter things out for optimal survival, eat, live, procreate, and so on.
Right.
But again, we don't perceive the radiation around us, the Wi-Fi, and these different frequencies that are the radio frequencies, they're always around us all the time, right? And so that's kind of the idea that there could be the shadow biome that Dr. Eric Davis talked about, where some of these entities may even reside right there.
Yeah.
Which I do want to get into a little later. I'm currently working on a presentation that's kind of involved in that. But you're in a very unique position because of your background and service to the country and working in intelligence, but you're also an experiencer. So given that you have this kind of bird's eye view on kind of both of these worlds, does the secrecy around the subject upset you?
Um, that, yeah, I'm torn with that question. It's a question of, I've had discussions, with other people, Lou and Chris Mellon, myself, and Steve Justice. He used to work for the Skunk Works. When To the Stars was first formed, all of us sort of agreed that we were going to work on the basis of a complete belief in this phenomenon, that the phenomenon was real, but not knowing what it was, but nevertheless it's real. So we weren't even going to entertain the idea, is this real or is this not? Yeah, it is real. So let's move forward from there. So when you look at it, part of me says, look, if this is a part of nature or it's a part of our reality, it's not right for anybody to deny us that knowledge. It truly isn't. And it's just something that's part of our legacy as a human being, and we need to know this. Then the other part comes in, and you say to yourself, well, if the end of World War II, all of a sudden, some craft appear, perhaps even a non-human intelligence, and the government, to not only the government, but to ordinary people. But let's say they show up and the government knows about it, and then you put some really fine minds together and you say, well, what do we do with this information? And then you look at it and you say, how disruptive is this going to be if it gets out? Number two, do any of our enemies know this, and are they trying to weaponize this? So you have all these problems. There's a lot more problems associated with it. So you look at that, and then you make a decision on what you want to do as a government. And then and I think in this particular case, they decided they wanted to keep it secret. So off they go for the last 80 some years, and I think to the detriment, of a lot of people who've had experiences and who were told they're crazy or they're nuts or whatever the story is, when it's exactly the opposite, right? So I'm torn. I've had people who I know are in the know, and I've mentioned this before, and one of them told me the truth is indigestible. It's not something that we would be able to fully grasp or entertain, and that it's like, it would be like telling somebody something that they can't do anything about, and they don't know what the repercussions of that would be. It's so great. It's so world changing and transformational, and maybe not in a good way, so.
I mean, what could be so jarring? What could be so disruptive? I mean, bless you.
Thank
like
you.
like the idea that we're being visited by another advanced intelligence that's more advanced than us. I mean, do you think, or is it something else?
I think it's much deeper than that. I think, if you talk to the ordinary American, I mean, it's so funny. We're talking about this. The listeners that are out there, we're part of a group, right? A very, very small group internationally, and that care about this topic and care about this subject. But we're really, really a niche, a group, and we're fellow travelers, but we're very, very small. And this phenomenon doesn't impinge on most people's personal lives. Maybe it impinged on yours James and on mine, and he's maybe some of the listeners out there, and it's very real to us, and we want to find out what it's all about, and that's understandable, and I'm all for that. But if you're Lou once mentioned to me, we were chatting about this, and I asked Lou one day what he thought, and he drew a Venn diagram, on a board, and and in the middle of the Venn, was, well, one side was consciousness and the other side was quantum theory. And the shaded part in the middle, he said, that's probably where this is. And when you think about that, what are the two things we really don't know all that much about, or that, could be extraordinarily scary? And consciousness, is it local or is it, non-local? If it's not local, not produced by the brain or the body or the mind, it really means that there is a universal consciousness that we're part of, that we're tapping into. Quantum theory, in the very early days of quantum theory in the 20s and 30s, most of the people who grasped what it actually meant was, that we're immaterial, that we're basically an illusion, and that atoms in general, we've come to find this to be true, are just basically invisible. There's no matter there, and that that where just energy forms. Well, think about that for a second. If that's the case, how would the president describe that? How would the president go on national television and say, maybe he tried to do a controlled, and I'm sure, and I know they've thought about this, and I know they thought about ways to do this, and they never can come to any kind of agreement, and they always come to the agreement that it's probably best not to say anything until we have a better understanding. But what the hell do you say? I mean, you come out and you say, there's another presence in the universe which visits us. And we don't understand it, but it's capable of transforming itself into anything it wants to do. It can manipulate matter. It can manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum. It can show us things that may be real or may not be real. It can be real and not real at the same time. I mean, you can just go on and on and on. And then this whole idea of sovereignty comes in, free will comes in. And then you're worried about, will society be able to withstand it? Will, socioeconomically, what will happen? Will things stop religiously? There are so many aspects surrounding this. Now, you look at that and you say, and it's easy to blame the government and say, well, still we need to know. And I understand that. I'm actually on the side that we really need to know, no matter what happens. But, once you state the fact, there's no going back. There's just like all this stuff with, that came out, and Congress is now involved in it. And, we played a very small part in getting those videos out, which sort of cascaded into what's happening now. The Congress is running right smack dab into this same problem. I'm sure people have whispered in some people's ears, do you really want to do this? Do you really want to go out and talk about this publicly? Do you have any kind of fallback position when people start asking the million questions they're going to have, and you're basically saying we're powerless against a entity or entities that are here, we can't see, we have no idea of their intentions and capabilities. It may mean that, we're just immaterial. I mean, you can get into, there's so many avenues. And then what does that open up? It opened up places for clowns like Alex Jones and I won't mention other people, but, to sort of come in and sort of take over the narrative, and then you're fighting those narratives. Well, it's, demonic, and well, it's this, and you're panicking people. Now, does the government or any government have a right to take that responsibility upon themselves? I don't know. That's a big question. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, you can go back and forth.
Well, and exactly to that question is, do you think that the secrecy is either legal or illegal?
I wouldn't get into, I actually goes into moral or immoral or ethical and unethical. I would think beyond like the legality of it. I think it's totally legal. Given that it was probably the program or the government, program that oversees all this was constructed in a way, I'm sure, that was legal. And you may question it. You may say, like Congress is questioning it right now and saying, no, we have the oversight. If you're spending our money, we need to know where it's coming from. But Congress doesn't own the program. I mean, it's my belief that the program is owned by the executive branch, and that the executive branch basically doesn't have to tell Congress what they're doing, and that the president has an enormous amount of powers. And if this was constructed, this legal arrangement that was constructed probably back in the late 40s, early 50s, under a presidential, executive action document, which most people don't know about, but they were real and they're true. Congress doesn't have to be told. If it's an extraordinary circumstance, and the president decides that the danger to the republic is such that this needs to be closely held, that's legal, and it's been upheld as legal and over the years. Now, has one of the Gang of Eight known about this over the years? Yeah, probably. It was whispered in people's ears, this is what's going on. And but we don't know anything more than we know. I don't think the government, obviously, I think that if the government knew more information about this and was able to say, we know what it is, it's here, this is our defense against it if it tries to do anything, I think there wouldn't be an issue. But I don't think they have any answers to that at all. And I think they're sort of stuck.
So where do you think this whole effort is going? We have this new language. They just showed new language just the other day. It's like UAP Disclosure Act 2.0. What do you think is going to happen with that kind of language?
Not much. I mean, you have really two big issues. You remember when the Schumer, the amendment came out, and then Schumer's, another amendment came out, and and then they sort of watered the first one down. And the reason they watered it down was primarily because when this program was started, where did it go? Right, it went to one or two government agencies that either belong to the executive branch or answers to the executive branch. It also went to private industry. If you had given this problem or this challenge to private industry, then you had to create what we call sole source contracting. These sole source contracts are highly protective of individuals and corporations, where the government is not allowed to reveal their identities if they're working on a government project. This is common knowledge. If anybody in the government, whether it's the FBI is using a private corporation or CIA or NSA or what have you to do work with them, the contracts are usually written in a way that the government can never admit publicly that this particular person or this particular private entity is doing business with them on that. I mean, these protections are built in. So you always have that. And that goes on for in perpetuity. It doesn't end after 50 years or 75 years. It goes on and on and on. I know this because I've done a lot of these operations, not with UFOs, but other operations where you absolutely have to protect a corporation or an individual who's working with you from their name ever coming out. And the agency would never do that. And no government agency would ever basically allow that to be made public. So that's one issue. The second issue is indemnity. If a corporation took on something like this, say, look, here's a downed craft, look at it. And the corporation said, okay, and is there any money available? And the president would say, yeah, we can get you some money, but the fact that you're working on this, if you pick up any information, it's going to be yours. I mean, we can't hide it from you. You're actually working on it, right? So the company probably putting its own money into it along with the government money. So that gets all mixed up like this. And that makes it even more complicated. So when Congress is now saying, we want to know, where it is, who are the companies, who are the government agencies that are running it, where the program is, you're running into a host of legal problems. And I think that's going to be a monumental battle if it indeed, takes place. When Dave Grush talked to Congress, I mean, I'm sure he told them where some of this can be found, who is working behind it, but you notice it hasn't come out. None of that's come out. And the reason why none of it's come out is because it's all TSSCI-TK, right? Top secret, special compartmented information, talent keyhole, which means that, some satellite information was involved in it too. That stuff isn't, most people in Congress aren't read into that level. I mean, most people in Congress are read into the secret level. If you're on the House, Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, or SISI's, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, yeah, you're going to have top secret clearances. You may even have a Q, which is, nuclear, but that doesn't mean you have a need to know, everything that's going on, right? And all the particulars. And as I've mentioned this before, Congress can get briefed on these programs, but there are a lot of programs, particularly waived, unacknowledged special access programs, where maybe the Gang of Eight will know about it, but nobody else, or maybe one or two people on the Gang of Eight may know about it and nobody else. That's at the discretion of the president and the National Security Council and or the particular agency that's doing it, because the topic may be so sensitive that they can't let that information out. So it's complicated. It's much, much more complicated than Congress is coming out and demanding something. There's a lot more to it than that.
So
I'm hoping it'll help, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly on this, say the language is perfect. Does that mean that there's going to be progress?
Yeah, I think there will be progress, but again, let's go back to the dilemma, right? So what's Congress going to do? So let's say, for instance, Senator Rubio, gets called into an office and they sit him down and they say, well, okay, you want to know what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. And they make him sign an agreement, and by the way, a lot of these agreements, Congress cannot, particularly if they come from the executive branch, Congress can't debate them. Congress can't do anything. I mean, they can't discuss them publicly or anything. But let's say they're given permission and they're told, okay, what do you want to do? So they're told the story, right? As much as the story can be told, I mean, the whole story, but the story is resoundingly incomplete, right? Because nobody knows, the intentions, the capabilities, the complete story. Because the phenomenon or these NHI haven't really told us either. And so you get that, and they say, and here are the reasons for talking about it publicly, and here are the reasons for not talking about it publicly. What do you think you're going to do? Well, Senator Rubio might look at it and make the decision that we can't talk about it publicly. Or Senator Rubio can say, I think we ought to talk about it publicly, but it's not my place to talk about it. It would have to come from the president. And I think that's what's going to happen. It's going to be a legal battle somewhere down the road. I don't know whether or not the Supreme Court will get involved in it. But there are a lot of elements that aren't being discussed. It's what I'm saying is it's much, much more than congressional legislation. You're going to need a little bit more than that.
Without getting into the weeds of that, could you just bullet list like some of the things that are not being discussed that are important to the conversation? You don't have to explain why. You can just say this.
Well, it's a conversation that's been going on now recently, with the power of the presidency and, where that lies, what the president can do, what the president can't do. I remember, back when President Trump first became president, he was at a news conference and he was talking about you wouldn't believe the powers I have. And he kept going on about it and the powers I have and what I can do. And he was, I think he was absolutely bowled over by what he has the power to do outside of Congress and the judicial branch. In other words, there's this unitary executive theory that's out there, you know, about what the role the president has, particularly in extraordinary circumstances. I don't think anything is more extraordinary and more potentially dangerous than the knowledge that there is a non-human intelligence or intelligences out there that have the capability to read your mind, come into your house, threaten the idea of sovereignty, free will. I mean, you know, you've had an experience, you know what that's like. And you don't even know, it's like me, you know, it's real. Yeah, I know, I believe it's real, but was it real? Don't know. We're in this sort of, it's a funny position to be in. You know, and this is why sometimes I get so upset with this whole issue that, you know, I just back away from it. I can't get involved in it anymore. And I don't know morally and ethically what the right answer is. I mean, I think I do, and you know, 1 month, and then I flip over the next month and say, no, maybe we can't do this. I mean, you know, if you know, 2/3 of Americans can't point to Miami on a map. I mean, we can go on and on about this, right? Most Americans, 50% of Americans read at a 6th grade level. I mean, you can go, and this is just Americans. This is worldwide population. How the hell do you throw this concept that, you know, let's just say, you know, it's a combination of quantum theory, like Lou said, it probably could be, and consciousness, two of the grandest problems that we have. I mean, you know, in physics and in, you know, and in neuroscience, and we can't wrap our arms around it. How the hell do you throw that out there? And what, I mean, it's like this big old meatball hanging out there, right? And you're asking people, you know, who are consumed with their daily life. You know what it's like. You got a family, you know what I mean? You know, you get up, you got a job, you got to do all this kind of stuff. And then somebody throws this huge thing at you and says, oh, by the way, we're not alone in the universe. And these other entities have godlike powers compared to us, can pretty much do what the hell they want, when they want. And we have no idea what the hell they're doing and why they're doing it. You know, and they tell us stories. They tell us what? 2 stories. They always tell us it's the environment and it's the nuclear problem, right? Those are the only 2 stories we hear. You know, we don't hear about where humans came from. We don't hear about where they came from. They always say to people, well, you wouldn't understand, right? You wouldn't understand. So we can't get into that. Is that real? Is that not real? Are they 100 years more advanced than we are? Are they, you know, possibly 3 or 4 million years more advanced than we are? You know, are they, you know, an ultra terrestrial race that, you know, lives on the planet with us, but maybe in another time dimension, you know, that maybe they're vibrating a little bit faster than we are, so we can't really see them. You know, I don't know. I mean, people say that a tree, like a redwood, experiences time much differently than we experience time, because the tree's there for 1,000 years or 2,000 years, right? And it just sees things at a much slower pace. Its growth rate's much slower, where we're extraordinarily fast. And the history of humans on this planet is a blip in time, you know. And you know, so you're trying to think of all this, you know, and then you all, and this is one of the reasons why we created To the Stars, and we're hoping that we can get enough funds to start investigating this, you know, and, you know, at least communally, internationally. To think, and this is what Peter Levenda says, I think it's something you might want to discuss with him if he's on your show in the future. You know, the whole idea of the government running the UFO problem, or the running the issue, is manifestly absurd. The government doesn't own this. The government can't own this. It's too big for the government. It's beyond the government's capabilities, and just like it's beyond our capabilities. So TTS was started because we wanted to take this private. And at that time, and I've mentioned this before, I went to senior people in the agency, DNI, and other agencies, and I said, we're doing this, and if you have any issues with this, you let me know now, and they all said, go with God, keep us posted. And I think they said, go with God and keep us posted because they want to know too what we find out. So hopefully that's our goal in the future, is to get some of these programs. We actually have ginned them up already, but we don't have enough money to fund them. But so I think that's what the situation is right now. And I think it's just highly, highly complicated. And it's more than just saying, I want to know the truth. What the hell do you do with it when you know it? Yeah.
Well, and that's why I am, my general philosophy and thought on this currently, and I guess has been, is that that's why it needs to be out in the open. That's why you need disclosure and confirmation, because the government can't do it alone, especially when it's siloed and compartmentalized. And yeah, there's a risk to sharing that information, because then you share with adversary nations. But we're at a catch-22, because we basically, from what I understand, they say within the programs they hit brick walls, because the security around it is so tight that you can't get anywhere. And that's basically the argument you made, that the nation and everybody, or even globally, is at a 6th grade reading level. Well, maybe that's because part of it is because they've been held back, right? Because if we had disclosed all of this in the 40s, probably not the best idea, actually. It's probably better that it wasn't. I think that it would have been a little crazier if you did it back then, just for a number of reasons. But let's say after some years, they started acclimating the public and disclosing this more openly, right? Because people will say they've been acclimating us. But, potentially we would be in a much different place right now, even evolutionarily, because we've been exposed to the information.
I think you're right. Matter of fact, I think that's exactly what's happening now. I mean, some people accused, Lou, me, Chris, Tom, of being government agents, like pulling a fast one on the government. And yeah, I mean, you can look at it. I mean, I can see where they looked at it that way and you say, oh, isn't this convenient? You have a counterintelligence guy, then you have, a former agency guy, then you have a former head of, Defense Department intelligence. They're all coming out and they're talking about this and they're pushing this. And, what are they doing? This is part of some kind of covert plan. Well, the answer is absolute nonsense. That's not the case at all. This is individual people that decided we needed to do this. We needed to talk about it more and get out there. But even we realize that, did we open a Pandora's box, to a certain extent? I mean, or did we open it more than it's already been open? Because it's been open for a long time. A lot of researchers have been doing this, for a long, long time, and we're relatively new to the game. But and I don't know the answer to that. I really, truly don't. And I don't mean to, be dismissive of, of the world population's, capacity to deal with this. And it sounds elitist, but I throw myself in the same damn category, right? I can't, I'm highly educated, but I can't understand it. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
Somebody once said, hey, he said, all we got to do is connect the dots. I said, show me the damn dots. I don't even know where the dots are.
Right.
And then the other issue too is like, what happens if what happens if there is a technology? And let's say these non-human intelligences, reveal themselves. Well, and they share things like you get, free energy or something like that, or you get some type of energy form that, is available to everybody. Well, then you're dealing with the same problem you've had since the beginning of time. Humanity, is humanity smart enough to be able to handle this a particular technology without killing themselves. And we're talking about AI right now, right? And what all that could mean. Well, let's put AI, advanced forms of AI, into the hands of, say, the Iranian government or the North Korean government. Well, I mean, what do you think they're going to do with it? Or the Russians? They're going to weaponize it. Just like, I'm sure people on our side are weaponizing it too. Humans, I don't know if we're ready for all this. And I don't know if we're capable of basically subjugating our worst instincts and having our best instincts, come forward. I don't know. And I remember Hal talking to me about this, Hal Putoff. He was involved in one of these,
think tanks.
yeah, talking about, whether should we talk about, should we let this out or not out? And his point was, look, in the beginning, almost everybody agreed that we should let this out. And he said, and after a day or two of writing, putting all the reasoning down, he said, we all decided unanimously, no, can't do it.
And I think it's one of those things that you can never be ready for. It's, baptism by fire. I hate to say that, but you can always find a reason why to procrastinate, even as an individual on an individual level with, doing something that seems risky or scary, but it's inevitable. So you have to take the plunge eventually. And I mean, I understand both sides too, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, look at it this way. Let's just say you're growing up and you find out that the person you thought, was your father wasn't your father, right? And actually it was somebody else. Very, very jarring experience, right? And it's an experience that's going to affect you for the rest of your life. Just like any kind of, traumatic experience that happens to you, now that's on one level, right? Think about something that's 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times more startling than that, particularly one that has an element of possible extinction or possible that you have no control over. I mean, you have control over this. You can go, you can take cognitive behavioral therapy. You can have chats with everybody. You can get support groups, talk about it. It's understandable, right? It's an understandable predicament. But what if somebody told you, that, forget about your dad, who's your real dad? Meet Xenon and, Pericles over here from another dimension, and let them tell you about, who you really are. And oh, by the way, you don't really exist because you're all just intentional pieces of consciousness. And, seriously, when you get down to that, how do people grasp that? I couldn't grasp.
Are you making the analogy that, the potential of the idea of God created us versus non-human intelligences have designed us or influenced our evolution?
That one too. I mean, do you throw religion out the window? I mean, I always get a big kick out of the Catholic Church. I was born and raised Catholic. I'm not Catholic anymore. But when they ask the Catholic Church, do you believe? And some also Protestant denominations have said the same thing. And do you believe in non-human intelligences and aliens and all that kind of? And they said, well, if it's true, we'll convert them. This is just more people to keep, that bring into our religion. And you sort of have to laugh at that. And you say, well, you better be damn sure. I mean, if you go up to a gray and say, do you believe in Jesus? And the gray looks just like from another planet, and said, what the hell are you talking about? The answer is no. And here's the reason why. And they explain that to you. And then that foundation is taken away from you, right? Because your whole life is built on foundations. It's built on the trust you have that the sun is going to rise every day, that your life is predictable and ordered. Who was it? T.S. Eliot, and the poet in the Four Quartets, said, mankind cannot bear too much reality. And this is exactly what this is about. How real do you want to get? I mean, your experience, you've thought about this quite a bit, just like my experience. What does this actually mean? What does it actually mean? So most people who become transformed by this see it as this natural progression, this initiation that they had,
right,
that unpleasant, and then they reach this spiritual awareness, what social psychologists might call a theophany, right? Or a catharsis, and they see the world completely differently. But what if even that vision doesn't even come close to what the real world actually is? And if the real world actually is, you know, doesn't exist unless you observe it, as quantum mechanics will say. So, I mean, we could all still be figments of each other's imaginations for all I know.
Yeah.
But the problem is, do you unleash that possibility? As that person told me, the knowledge of this is indigestible. In other words, people cannot digest it. Well, shit, you and me are sitting here having an experience. You can't digest it. You don't know what it is. If you knew what it was, you wouldn't be having a conversation with me. You'd be shouting it from the rooftops. You'd be saying, "Oh, this is it, the personal transformation, blah, 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 blah." But I think you have a lot of questions. And just like I have a lot of questions, I want to know why they came. I want to know why they damaged my wife. I wanted to know why they damaged me. I wanted to know for what possible purpose they could have done that. And if they can do that to me and you, what else can they do? What can they do to everybody else?
Yeah. And we're gonna shift gears after this question a bit, because there's so much I want to discuss with you. But do you think that the phenomenon or phenomena, however you want to look at it, are the architects of the secrecy?
It's something. The answer, I don't know, but the within certain circles now, that's the discussion, is that the government may be being prevented from discussing this, or being told not to do that. One of the things I brought up before, I was on a podcast not too long ago. I think I went to the Stars podcast, and I said, well, what if the phenomena? I mean, the phenomena doesn't do anything, right? It just shows itself whenever the hell it wants to. It's completely unpredictable. It tells you what it tells you, doesn't give you any proof of anything. It teases you, it cajoles you, it scares you, it terrifies you, but you can't bring it home to meet the parents, right? I mean, it's not something where they do the formal handshake. It's not landing anywhere and saying, "Hey, I'm Klaatu, right? And I'm here to, send you a message, right?" They're not doing that. It's not doing that, and you have to ask yourself, why isn't that happening? And if so people get mad at the government, and they say, well, the government should be letting all this information out. Well, shit, blame the phenomenon. That's what I'm doing. I mean, more so than the government. That's the one that's not sharing. And does it have a good reason? Doesn't even deal with reason. Is reasoning even a part of its existence? We don't know. We have no idea. They could be so far advanced that they look at us as microbes, and, well, okay, here's a development of a microbe, that we developed years and years ago. Do we give it another level of consciousness? Do we go from having a basic consciousness like an animal to self-consciousness, which we have now? Do we bring it into a form of cosmic consciousness, like William Buck talked about around the turn of the last century? Do we bring them into that, and are we ready? And maybe your experience, my experience, and this whole conversation about that is a preliminary, for that to be happening down the road. Maybe it's an introduction to the age of Aquarius, how the astrologers would talk about it. It's fascinating. The answer is I don't know.
Yeah. And there's a funny correlation with the age of Aquarius and then like Vedic astrology, with the different yugas, and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
next out of the Kali Yuga, which Sri Yukteswar speculated that we're actually, since the end of the 1800s, moved into the electric age, or the Dwapara Yuga, And that's like the beginning of this gradual over very long time awakening where, we discover electricity, gravity, weak and strong forces, nuclear forces, and all that, into eventually where it gets to another level of evolution after another 2,000 year period, 2,400 year period. Very interesting correlations with that.
Yeah.
But I just want to place this here. I was gonna put it later in the discussion, but what do you think of the idea of the potential or the idea of non-human intelligences having agreements somehow with some terrestrial or government organization?
I certainly think it's possible. I've had some information that said that it's actually what is going on to a certain extent, which begs 1,000 questions, right? What did they say? What do they want? And again, are they the ones directing traffic?
Right.
My feeling is they are the ones directing traffic, and on why wouldn't they? If they're that powerful, and we know about it, and they seem to be concerned about our welfare, are they the ones who are basically saying, or maybe, are they speaking to us symbolically? Are they showing up? Who was it? They call it reinforcement, a system of reinforcement. Yeah, the unpredictability, but nevertheless, it happens. And Jacques Vallée talked a lot about that, the idea that looks like that's exactly what's going on. They show up in a regular, well, you don't know when they're going to show up, but they do show up. And it's like it's introducing a concept. It's like when you want to get your kids to do something, or your kids to eat something. Let's say that you want to get to eat broccoli. Well, if you put the broccoli in front of them at least 10 times, eventually one of the kids is going to grab a piece of broccoli and just put it in his mouth to see what it's like. He might spit it out, but in other words, you get used to it. Or you want to convince your wife that you want to do something, and you say, I want to go to someplace, and she's absolutely out of the question. And then you bring it up again, and then she's, well, we'll talk about it. And then, next thing you know, it's like, she thought about it, right? And you didn't think about it. So yeah, and that's a valid concept, and it works. It absolutely works. I mean, they proved it in behavioral psychology. So that's a possibility for this. But if you ask me in all sincerity, I think the whole situation is, is so complicated that it's not as simple. It's just not simple, and it's I call it a wicked problem. And I've spoke about this before. This whole idea of a problem. Take a problem like world poverty, right? How do you solve world poverty? So you prevent children and people from starving. Well, there are so many variables associated with solving that problem that they're almost, they're beyond our control in some respects. So how do you attack it? Well, there are social psychologists that will take you in a room and they'll say, all right, what's the wicked problem? Right, here's the wicked problem. Okay, poverty. And you'll have 5 or 10 people in the room. You have a facilitator, and the facilitator will say, okay, we're gonna try to solve poverty, but we're gonna need to break it down, world poverty. So you create something what they call a mess map, right? And a mess map is just a bunch of people sitting around talking and putting up Post-it notes on a board and saying, well, here's a problem. Well, here are the 5 or 10 areas we have to focus on. And under those, you have these subsets and then subsets of the subsets. And then when you're all finished after 2 or 3 days, you've basically gotten maybe 90 to 95% of the problems associated with world poverty. Where do you start? Do you eliminate a particular leader in a country because that leader is siphoning off all the money for himself, and not, how do you solve that problem? And then how the distribution, I mean, it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
on. And some of them are almost insoluble anyway, because what if you're dealing with religious differences or tribal differences where people won't talk to other people? It's just, it's too much. And it's why a lot of progress hasn't been made. The human condition is such that we generally tend to be untrustworthy. We don't like the other, right? Whoever the other is, whether it's Democrats, Republicans. I mean, you can go on and on and on about the other, right? They don't look like us. I mean, look at the problems, the Black population have had. And, there's no such thing as racism. I mean, racism basically, well, I mean, there is racism, but in general, there is no such thing as race. We're all from the same, we share the same DNA. How the hell can you have any, racial, it's just color, right? It's the way people look, the way people act, what people believe in. Those are the issues. And it's very, very hard for people to overcome that fear. And I think it goes back to, primal days, when you didn't know who the hell that was going to come around the corner, right? And club you to death or something like that. So we haven't even begun. Well, we have begun and we've made great progress, but I don't think we're anywhere near that. And I think a lot of that has to be resolved before this phenomenon can be digestible for most people and people could accept it in a way as a human community together, Now, some people say, well, if you let this out, maybe that will bring us closer together. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe will divide us more. Did you see the 3-Body Problem on Netflix?
I didn't. I'm familiar with the synopsis though.
Yeah, I did a simultaneous podcast, I think for episode 4. They wanted to talk about intelligence and how intelligence services work together, and as I did it on that, it was fascinating. But it was a excellent trilogy, and it's very dense and but beautifully done. And but is what happened. When the others are coming to visit us, right? There are some people in the world that basically formed groups that were anti-human for all intents and purposes, and they wanted the world wiped out. Because they thought, like some environmentalists, some radical environmentalists say, get rid of the human race and blah, 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 blah. So I'm sorry, I'm probably.
No, that's fine. So I did want to shift gears a bit, different parts of the conversation. So, again, you were in CIA. Did you ever work in the Science and Technology Directorate?
As a contractor, I did, yes.
Yeah.
Very familiar with it. A great, great organization. I mean, I always call it the real CIA because you would not believe what these people are capable of. There it is incredible.
Yeah, people say it's like magic.
It's just beyond the pale. I mean, some of it is just you'd be very, very proud. I think I think the American public, if they saw the inner workings of not just CIA but other agencies like the FBI and NSA and and other intelligence organizations, the Marshal Service. I mean, just really good people doing extraordinary things.
Well, there's a conversation that came up in regards to crash retrievals. UAP, UFO crash retrievals. There's stories of crashes. There's stories of completely intact craft being discovered and retrieved. There's stories of, non-human intelligence vehicles being shot down. So, within all that, one of the names that came up was the Office of Global Access. And that's allegedly under CIA, or not allegedly, is under CIA. Does that idea make sense in regards to you have this organization that may be tapped in incidents like that?
Well, first of all, I can't comment on, where if there is a program that exists, I can't comment on where it might be, what it's about, who runs it. I just can't go there. And so
understood. Understood. And
And I'm not saying it's there. I'm just saying I just,
correct.
no matter where it was, I couldn't comment on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because that somebody ran a story and they had I believe they said they had 3 sources that came to them confidentially. Obviously their identities weren't shared, and they said that. So that's something that was going on. And as somebody on the outside looking in, it kind of makes sense, because yeah, they would have the means to pull something like that off, especially if there was a craft that went down in another country or what have you. They can go in and extract whatever it is, and it just made sense to me. But getting to, again, the idea of okay, we have an intact craft. There's the story of Admiral Wilson is getting read into this program, and he discovers that they're talking about a craft that's potentially operational, and that memo or transcript was provided to Congress. So do you think that there's any legs to that?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Yeah. What about you had and this is amazing to me. I still can't believe this, that in Dr. Jim Lukatsky in his book with Colum Kelleher and George Knapp shared that he was in a briefing where they disclosed that we had an intact vehicle of allegedly of non-human origin. So when you have somebody of that level make that kind of claim, and apparently it was ran through Dopser, and he was still able to put it in the book. What do you make when somebody of that level makes a claim like that?
I generally tend to believe him. I like Dave Grush, same thing. He's top flight guy, and I think the problem, here's what the problem with all of this stuff is. I mean, when whistleblowers come out, whistleblowers are saying Congress says you can't be prosecuted for coming out and talking about it, right? Well, that's Congress saying that, right? But that's not necessarily true. If the program doesn't belong to Congress legally, it belongs to somebody else, say the executive branch, and the only person legally, and again, there's ethical, moral issues involved in here too, but legally, the only person that could really discuss that would be the president or the president's representative, whoever that might be, and come out with that information. So Congress is basically saying, according to our rules and regulations, you can be a whistleblower and we'll protect you. And they have protected people, right? And then the executive branch isn't saying anything. Isn't that interesting? Whistleblowers are, I don't make any judgments about it. There's Title 10 and there's Title 50, right? One's what deals with the military and one's with the intelligence, and they're slightly different, actually more than slightly different in some respects. And well, I don't want to talk about it too much more, but it's when credible people come out and say things, fine. But you notice, like when what David said it, he followed the rules. He said it to the inspector general, and it was all TS, top secret stuff, code worded and everything like that. So he kept it that way. And you notice Dave isn't on television, or he isn't on thing, saying, oh, it's here, it's there, and this, and he knows. I mean, it's like, this is where everything is. He told Congress, but he didn't, I'm sure he didn't even tell Congress everything, because he knows the system and how it works. So,
and
As far as downcraft and everything like that, you know, if you ask me, do I believe that? Absolutely.
What do you make of the claims that David David Grush made, saying that, you know, people have potentially died to keep this secret, that there's been retaliation against individuals who spoke out of terms in regard to the program? I mean, would and can, you know, the program do such things if they, you know?
Um, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that if the program was, and I believe it was, I mean, I see if it was done under a presidential executive action document, the president then says to an agency or entity in government, you know, you run this. And by the way, you're running it through these rules. And these are the guidelines. And that entity is then given extraordinary powers by the president to prevent this thing being leaked. For instance, somebody once asked somebody, you know, flat out, is this program exist? And the person just said, absolutely not. Well, as it stands, under certain restrictions, particularly regarding unacknowledged, waived unacknowledged special access programs, that's the response you're supposed to give. Nope, doesn't even exist. You don't say no comment.
Right.
You say doesn't exist, and you're allowed to lie to anybody about it. I mean, you know, this is part of the government, you know, that functions. It's not a big part of the government. It's a very, very small part of the government, actually. But nevertheless, you know, I'm sure this happened during, you know, the Manhattan Project. So did people, were they retaliated against? I'm sure, absolutely. They were retaliated against in some form or fashion. Dave was, I mean, it was against Dave. Dave might have been more of an institutional retaliation. I don't know. I mean, I don't know all the full details about that, but it's not, I mean, once you go against the, you know, that's why I'm very careful. It's like, you know, I'm retired and everything like that, but you know, but you have to be respectful also of the rules and the regulations to a certain extent. So, you know, in David's case, I think there were extenuating circumstances, and you know, he chose the path he chose, and you know, I think he definitely moved the ball forward, no question about it. But you notice, you know, what he says and what he doesn't say. He's an extremely bright guy. I mean, really bright guy, and he knows the territory, and he knows essentially what to say and what not to say.
Yeah. And I think David alluded to a few instances that weren't institutional, in the sense where some people had entered his home on two different occasions or something. I don't know of course, I don't know the details of that, but I think he made reference to that. So that seems
Oh
like,
yeah, I don't I wouldn't, absolutely, that I'm sure that would be part of that. If you are a government employee with a top secret clearance, particularly a top secret clearance, and David had all the damn clearances. I
right.
mean,
Yeah.
and you start talking out of school, the first thing they're going to want to know is, you know, do you have any documents at home, on your computer or anything like that? And they're going to start, and they will, there's no hesitation, you know, going into your house, monitoring your phones, what have you. Um, Interestingly, and this happens all the time, and it's not even, it may not even have been the US government. It could have been another foreign intelligence agency doing this. When TTS was first started and we started talking about this, our computers got compromised. And and we sort of have an idea who compromised them, and it wasn't the US.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, have my phones been tapped? Um, I wouldn't put it past them. I could care less, to be honest with you. If my home been broken into, I don't know, could care less. I don't have any classified data here, and I try to, I don't talk about classified information. I touch the border sometimes of some of this stuff, but I always like to make it, and say, look, this is my opinion. I'm not speaking for anybody. But I'm a little bit different. I had an experience, so I don't want the government telling me I didn't have it. I don't want the government telling me to shut up about it. It's my goddamn business. It's nobody else's business. And if I want to talk about it, I'll talk about it. And if I want to talk about what I've read and what I know, I'm going to do it. But I'm not going to let classified information out. I don't have the right to do that. I
Right.
signed an agreement, and that won't happen.
Yeah. And you know, what do you oh, let me say it like this. In regards to the program, I mean, it sounds like, I guess people call it the program, the UFO legacy programs. Do you think there's people within those programs that they want this information public?
Yeah, I mean,
Not the details of the technical stuff, right?
yeah, I'm sure, absolutely. I mean, when there was the term that Jacques Vallée coined. I think it was Jacques who coined it, but the invisible college. This whole idea of government people, forming these unofficial, conversations regarding this topic. All through the government. As a matter of fact, for a while, the intelligence community had a whole string. Had a string, one particular string devoted to this particular topic that you can talk to other people in the government about it. I don't know if that still exists or not. And it was a classified string, but nobody discussed classified information, but they discussed the topic in general. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people. The problem is, with people is like if you have a 3,000-foot view of the issue, you might find it you might be convinced that this needs to be out. But if you have a 10,000-foot view of the problem, you're absolutely convinced that this shouldn't go anywhere and it should stay exactly where it is. So everybody has some of the people, like for me, I have a little bit of a view, but I'm not dumb enough to think, that just because I know X, that I have the answer to, to that this should be out and blah, blah, blah. I don't have that. And when somebody tells me, look, there's another view that's a lot higher than yours, much, much higher than yours. And it comes down to to a matter of trust, right? Do you trust the people that made these decisions and who still maintain these decisions about secrecy on this particular topic? So you look at it, and I know some people say these are unelected people, and I mean, we didn't elect these people to the government, and they're controlling the knowledge on that. Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, you have elected the president, or you have elected other people, and the president and Congress has confirmed people to run these particular agencies, and there is always a matter of trust there. I mean, you have to trust that person to do the best thing. So let's say this program began in the late 40s, early 50s. Here you got these, military and newly formed intelligence officials sitting around. And we know the agency was involved, CIA was involved in this in the early, this has been written about publicly in the 50s and the 60s and what have you. But, you have to assume that they're doing everything in the best interest of the government. And then you get MK Ultra. Then you go, holy shit, there are people that are not doing the best things in the interest of the government. I mean, CIA was opening mail, CIA was doing all kinds of things. And it wasn't until 1975 that they dropped they just dropped the ladder on them. And they said, okay, none of this stuff's just going to go anymore. We're going to do oversight, which was a great thing. And now they have that. And now we got lawyers literally everywhere and any operation that you undertake has to go through a legal review, which I think is a great idea. And I think, in for instance, my time with the agency, I've never run into a problem. I mean, I ran into some stupid ass, things they were thinking of doing. It wasn't necessarily them, but other people, that they wanted to do that, and they wanted the agency to, go along with it. And the agency sometimes would fight it and sometimes would go along with it. But you would look at that and you go, well, those are decisions, that somebody's going to have to make, and there's no clear answer that you're going to try it. And I think that's what happened with Snowden. And I'm not going to get into too much on Snowden, but Snowden looked at one thing that was going on. And I sort of agreed with him on that. I sort of said, yeah, I don't think that was a good idea. But what Snowden did, instead of taking that one little piece and going to Congress with it, or going to the Inspector General with it and saying, I don't agree with that, and he did go to some of his management, but I think they told him, well, it's not, you're a GS 12 or 13. It's not your call, it's the call of somebody else to do that. But he decided on his own he was going to make this public. But not only that, he downloaded hundreds of thousands of documents and he gave them to the Chinese and the Russians. He's a traitor as far as I'm concerned. And, but if he had any balls, he should have just basically gone public with it. The most that would have happened to him, he's might have got 18 months in jail, but he would have been a hero to some people and a martyr to some. But no, he didn't do that. And the same with these whistleblowers, they don't want to come out. And, when a whistleblower goes to somebody and tells you a story, how are you to believe it? You don't have any documents. Nobody comes up with any documents, right? They just tell you this story. Well, I'm an insider and I'll tell you this story. It becomes another narrative and it muddies the waters. But you get a guy like Dave Grush, total different kind of whistleblower. I mean, here's a guy who comes out and says, hey, it's me. I'm telling you this and it's the truth. And he puts himself out there. You got to admire that to a certain extent. I mean, you really do have to admire that. And he put a name, to it. And you don't see very many of those. Most of the whistleblowers are, they've shown themselves to Congress, but their names haven't come out, or they didn't want their names to come out, which is fine. I don't have any issue with that. I mean, everybody chooses their own poison. But when you get a guy who like David, who comes out and he's pretty much unimpeachable as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And, I have a number of questions I wanted to get to. Some are of a speculative nature. One of them was the idea of non-human intelligence walking among us. That's something that has been coming up from time to time. So when you hear something like that, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an absolute possibility. And, Dave Jacobs, formerly from Temple University, he's written numerous books on this topic and about the idea that they are among us and they're trying to transform the human race. I mean, you look at that and, on the face of it, it sounds like, sci-fi, fiction novel or something like that. But given the capabilities of what we know right now about non-human intelligence, I think it's reasonable to assume that might be the case. Now, here we have the same issue, right? Where's the proof in all this? This is what drives scientists crazy, right? And because they're working within this model and the phenomenon doesn't fit into the scientific model or the paradigm. William James, century ago talked about the need for what he called a radical empiricism, the science that allows the anomalous inside. Even though it doesn't have testability, you can't replicate it, you can't test it, it's just there. So but it's there. So what do you do with it? With science, it's become almost atheistic on this, right? They I'm sorry if it doesn't fit our model, it doesn't belong here. Well, that's ridiculous. They should open this up a little bit more, and they have been. So you're finding more and more scientists that are willing to basically engage with this. But that's the real issue here. The phenomenon gives us radar data, sonar data, the occasional photograph, with eyewitness testimony, but the craft doesn't land in public. The craft doesn't land in front of the National Science Foundation and said, hey, we're here and let's talk. They don't do that. It doesn't happen. And that's really the problem. And that's why this topic will always remain a niche topic and will remain something that, that belongs to people like you and me and your listeners. But that's about it. I mean, I live in a small community in Delaware, and every once in a while, somebody will come into my little workshop here, my man cave, and I never bring this topic up because it's been my experience that most people's eyes glaze over. And but every once in a while, somebody will, look at my bookshelf, and they'll say, "Oh, are you into UFOs or something like that?" And I'll say, "Yeah." And if they don't ask me questions, I don't push the topic. But even when they do push the topic, some people get really not upset, but they're very uncomfortable with it. And particularly coming from me, because I said, well, okay, he's an agency guy, he's a real agency guy, senior guy. He knows some stuff, and they don't like hearing it. It fucks up their order. You know what I mean? Excuse my French. I'm sorry. It screws their life up a little bit, because all of a sudden there's something more they have to think about. I mean, when you think about religion in general, like I said, I grew up Catholic. So, I mean, when you go to mass, the priest will tell you, and when there's the part of the mass where the host goes up, I mean, that's the transubstantiation, they call it. I mean, it's a fancy word for saying, I am turning this wafer into the real, honest to God body of Christ, and the wine into his blood. And when you accept that into your body, you are accepting Christ into your body, the physical Christ and the spiritual Christ into your body. That is an extraordinarily wild concept,
Yeah.
but most Catholics, body of Christ, amen, and off they go, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they feel much better. But when they
yeah.
actually see what the ritual is about and what you're actually saying and what you're actually accepting, that's extraordinarily profound. And not only profound, I mean, how odd, how weird, how supernatural, how strange is that? The idea of the resurrection, which most with Christianity is based on, you wouldn't have Christianity if Christ didn't rise from the dead, right? And he would just be a prophet or something like that. But it's based on that. But the idea of his body going up in a spiritual form, people accept that as truth. Christians will accept that as truth. Most Christians accept that as truth, but they don't but they don't think about it and what it actually means, and what it entails, what's behind that. They just go through the motions. Well, it's like you and me, right? Or people that haven't had experiences. They go through the motions with this stuff, but when somebody actually sits you down, or you actually have an experience and you experience yourself, or somebody you trust implicitly tells you, this is the way the world works, this is what's out there, it's scary. It's absolutely frightening sometimes to think about that, because it alters everything. You're no longer getting up in the morning and shaving and brushing your teeth and going to work. You have this whole other thing to think about. And you should think about it, because that's what we're on the planet for, right? Becoming better persons, becoming more compassionate and more kind to one another, and more knowledgeable, about ourselves and about our universe. I mean, that's pretty much what we're here for. At least I think that's what we're here for. So, and it's unsettling. It's unsettling for a lot of people, and they don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk about it.
Well, and when you get into the deeper aspects of that, like, what does this mean, right? Do you think that there's something in that speaks to, again, the nature of reality, but with that, right, human potential?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the phenomenon itself, this whole subject area, is basically just that. I mean, you said it perfectly. It's about the nature of reality. It's about what is actually real and what we're capable as human beings of understanding, and the knowledge of what we don't understand. I remember there was a book written, it was a seminal book in my life. It was called The Ascent of Man by a fellow named Jacob Bronowski. I remember reading it in college, and I remember towards the end of it, it was talked about Nazis and stuff like this, and how, how the Nazis, treated, Jews and the others, and what they did. But I remember one point towards the end, he was explaining to somebody, a Nazi or somebody in Germany, said, I beseech you to think that you might be wrong about something. You might be wrong about this. And it was a very powerful statement for me, because what it said was, we go through our lives accepting things as real and accepting things as normal. And in reality, all we're really doing is superficially accepting things as we go along, as we don't really know, but somebody told us that way. Most people who are religious because their parents were religious, and they went to school and to church, and they were told a narrative. And the narrative sounded reasonable to them because their parents believed it, and they love their parents, and their parents are smart. And the people that hang around with them who believe in it are very smart and reliable people. So you fall into that, and that's understandable, and that's perfectly fine. But it's the people that sit there and go, wait a minute. I'm not going to accept this. This is what scientists do, right? Don't accept, what you see. Try to figure out how it works. I love these people, like, Musk and Jobs and all these people. They weren't satisfied with, a piece of, when they were growing up, a clock. They had to take the damn clock apart and look and see how it worked. And how can I make that a better clock? Steve Jobs, how do I make a better computer? Gates, how do I make a better software program? These are the people that push us forward. And we need more of those people doing this kind of stuff. And actually, we are doing this kind of stuff. So you should pat yourself on the back. And those listeners out there should also pat themselves on the back for that, because what you're doing is you're part of a community that is searching for truth. And I can't think of anything more noble than that.
When it comes to the phenomenon, how do you reconcile the idea that there seem to be recovered craft or vehicles and bodies or biologics, yet there's this psychic or metaphysical element to it?
Yeah, this is what I always credit Lou and Chris Mellon for doing when they spoke with Congress. They made sure, and not just that. I mean, not just those two. I think Jay Stratton was involved, and some of the others were involved. They wanted to make sure that they also studied the biological elements involved in this phenomenon, because and Jacques Vallée talks a lot about this, the idea of the phenomenon being a control mechanism, something that's basically guiding us or controlling us to do things a certain way or to see things a certain way. A lot of people believe that these experiences that you had and that I had are meant to be disruptive, spiritually and psychologically, because what it does is makes us see something that we normally would never have seen before, and that can transform us into a different type of person, and most of the time a better person, I think, down the road. But yeah, I mean, there has never been, in my knowledge, a contact experience or a abduction experience that didn't have a biological and a psychological effect, or even a spiritual effect to it. That it, part and parcel, goes with the experience itself. Some people choose not to open themselves up to it, others, have no choice but to. Others is, terribly, unsettling for them, and they never recover from it. I
Right.
know
Yeah.
2 or 3 people who just are just, have very serious issues with this.
Yeah. I've seen both myself. For better or worse, that's just the effect. Do you think that in some way, shape, or form that we're coming to a head with the phenomenon, in in this, that okay, we're publicly talking about it more. It's in the media more. There's more people joining in on the conversation. You think that there will be, I don't want to say an event like that, but do you think that the phenomenon will ever become more assertive and that we'll be more aware of their presence on a collective level? You know, either just on their own schedule or because we're now taking a more assertive position slowly in engaging with the phenomenon?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And the ultimate answer is, I don't know whether there's going to be any kind of major, opening where, either something shows itself or, the government says anything. I think that'd be pretty hard to predict. What I will tell you is in the intelligence community, say, for instance, you wanted to know about a particular topic. What's the military capabilities of this foreign nation, right? Well, you would get some very, very smart people who would say, okay, here's all the questions we need to get answered, right? So they would come to people like me, the clandestine officers, and they would say, all right, now you're part of this process to find this out. So we're gonna be using satellite communications, electronic communications, and all these other things to find out as much information as you can. But we also need human information. So you go in and you try to, recruit a spy, and you try to find out what this military is like in this new country or this country. So you do that, and you take those questions and you go in and you ask this person who decided he was going to spy for you, and you say, um, what are your capabilities? And the guy comes back, he tells you all this data, and you come back with the data. More information is then generated, and it's a snowball effect. And what happens is you now have a wealth of data sometimes after only a period of like 6 months, and you combine it with the other data and you get this bigger picture. And this is what is definitely happening now. What's happening now is you're getting more and more people involved in this who have more and more information. And as all of this stuff gets combined together, and you have more, particularly more scientists and more social scientists involved in this, more papers being produced, more conversations, and it's a fascinating topic. No question about it, right? It is just fascinating. It draws people's attention. That is what's going on now, and that is going to move forward, and then it's not going to go backwards. That's going to go forwards, and I think we're well into this, and that's, to me, is the hopeful part of this. It's up to the phenomenon to determine whether it reveals itself, but we're creating the capability to look at this more. And I think you're going to find, hopefully in the future, what we were hoping when we started To the Stars, that we would create this international community that, we would be able to fund certain projects. We can go to, a university in Tokyo, and say, hey, work on this one particular problem. Here's $100,000, right? And then another university in Prague, and maybe one in Germany, and then, a University of Arizona or Harvard, and you sort of direct the money that way, and you would have a group of people sort of running it, and then you're trying to find out more and more information about this particular topic. That's sort of what's going on now. The problem with what's happening now, it's too disparate. It's all over the place. You have so many good foundations, like the Soul Foundation, with Gary and Keith Basterfield started, wonderful, wonderful organization. You got Free that's out there. It's a little bit smaller. You got MUFON, and there's a lot more that exists. Oh, you got SCU, another great organization, but they're all sort of doing different things, and they're not really, they know one another because it's a small community, but there needs to be a greater focus, and a more of a communal effort. And that's extremely difficult to do because of personalities and funding and money. And, if we had the money that SETI had, for instance, I think it would be a different ballgame.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to know, because this is something that has come up a few times. Is there any connection between Havana syndrome and UAP?
Wow. It's a possibility, but I think it's much, much smaller. I think, well, I know, what's behind Havana syndrome to a certain extent. And I've mentioned this. I mean, I've spoken at classified level of this with people that were meant to know. And I think that's totally a terrestrial thing.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, yeah, but maybe the question could be, is it just Havana syndrome that some of the cohorts were mixed in with each other and then they had to be separated? Is one aspect of it, and the other is the Havana syndrome technology something that was inspired by UAP technology?
It wasn't inspired. I know where it was inspired. I know
Okay,
where it
okay,
came from. And no, it's been around
yeah,
for a long time. It's
yeah,
probably been around since the 70s. And matter of fact, you could probably, develop it yourself, which off the shelf technology. It's extraordinarily dangerous to use. I won't get into some of the details about, how it's used and what you can do and can't do. But there is a possibility. I mean, one of the most interesting comments I heard on it was Pompeo, and he was the head of the Department of State Department, made a comment, and they asked him about it, and he said he ascribed it to a what did he call it? A non-state intelligence service, a non-state hostile intelligence service. Think about that for a second. Non-state, okay, it's say a terrorist organization. Hostile, obviously. Intelligence service. So what does that actually mean? It could mean a corporation, and I would say an evil corporation who's learned of the technology and decided they were going to sell the information they garnered by using this technology, and possibility, and or other intelligence organizations with evil intent. And I'm not. Let's just say there are intelligence organizations out there that are state intelligence organizations that are absolutely ruthless,
right,
ruthless, and they have no compunction to doing what anything they want to do to just screw with the West.
yeah.
Very
I'm sorry, this is like a non-UAP related question at this point, but then why is it being denied to everybody? Why do people have to come on 60 Minutes that have been affected by something like that, and they're being told it's not true?
Well, I don't think I think everybody realizes now that it's true. I mean, it's real that people have these real problems. I think there might be an issue with saying all of these attacks were done by a certain organization, and that because it might have been more than one, and
Right.
that have done that. And the other part of it is it's extremely difficult to prove. How do you prove it? So, and how do you get redress, right? I mean, do you go after them? I mean, what do you say? I mean, the only thing you can do is like do it in kind, right? And you don't want to do that. So,
Right.
but the problem is for people that have been affected by it. And there was actually, I was told that was a possibility I might have got whacked back in the uh, early 80s by it. I had the same symptoms, terrible, terrible vertigo, headaches, noises. I mean, tinnitus. I mean, just off the charts. After I was in the Middle East and I was near a foreign,
Place.
well, I just,
Yeah.
but anyway, that technology was available at that time, and I was in a particular place that they probably wanted to know what was going on, and probably got whacked by it. But I
Yeah.
can't prove it,
So
and
I want to go over some kind of miscellaneous questions I have. They're kind of like a little
yeah,
bit all over the place, so forgive me, but there's things I want to get to before I let you go because I know you're a busy guy. Um, so I'm just gonna go over like quick shot fire some questions.
sure.
Um, the you know one thing we spoke about before that I wanted to get here on the record was just like, okay, the idea that, Sean Kirkpatrick can gain access to some of these UFO legacy programs.
The answer is I mean, I don't know whether he has gained access or not. There's some things that lead me to believe that he at least knows about them, and there are some aspects believe that he doesn't know about them at all, or he does, or he inquired and was told, don't you don't want to go there.
Yeah.
There's other reasons that make me believe he probably might be aware of it, but not involved in it.
Yeah. And this is something that has come up a few times, especially from Tom, and it caught my attention when he was talking about it back in like 2016. I think this was even before, or maybe it was 2014. I think it was before To the Stars came out. I'm not sure, but he was talking about this incident that I found truly fascinating, and I ended up inquiring through my own network and got the impression that it was something very valid. It was a Starfish Prime.
Yeah. Now, I know Starfish Prime, but I'm blanking on what it
So
is.
The way that I've heard Tom talk about it, and according to this kind of narrative of it, is that United States was doing a high altitude nuclear detonation in the Pacific in the early 1960s, and that detonation took down an object, possibly intentionally, to see if EMP had that effect also, as well as a genuine test, right? But that some people in the room were intentionally trying to see if they could take UAP down via EMP pulse or, through this nuclear detonation. And I always found that as a fascinating idea. And I got the impression that was a real event.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know
Yeah.
we did a lot of those detonations back in those days. Now, I recall the story now, and but one of the things that I think the U.S. in particular has learned, and I think the Russians to a large extent also, is you don't try to shoot them down. I mean, you don't deliberately try to cause damage.
To UAP?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what reason would you want to do it? I mean, the idea is they're in our airspace, right? But what if we're in their airspace? I mean, you don't have that. And, none of these things have ever fired weapons at anybody, right? As far as I know of, they haven't. And they've always been, avoidant.
You said that they learned that they shouldn't do that?
Yeah.
How did they learn?
They had incidents where they've gone after UAPs and fired on them, and they realized that what they were doing wasn't working, and that it was detrimental, and that some pilots are they don't they're jockeys, right? I mean, these guys they'll push it, and sometimes they push it too far, and I think a couple pilots died not because the UFO did anything, but because they pushed their craft beyond the
Equipment.
limits.
Yeah.
So yeah, and in all honesty, I mean, if you have a craft that can go like a tic tac from 80,000 feet to 50 feet above the water in 0.78 seconds, and you have no clue what its capabilities are you really going to fire on it? You think Dave Fravor would have fired on it? Hell no, he wouldn't have fired on it. He was more interested in what it was.
How do you think it is that we come into possession of some of these crafts then?
There are so my understanding is that some craft crashed during an electrical storm was one. Another one was a test that was being done and inadvertently flew through that and screwed them up somehow. There's also a feeling that they deliberately do that. Don't forget, these little beings that come out of them are probably, biological robots,
Right.
and
They deliberately crash.
yeah, to to basically, it's almost like the abduction experience, right? What's the purpose of the abduction experience?
Right.
Well, it seems like it's, well, to give you a transformative experience, right? Well, if you have a craft that lands and you have 3 dead bodies or 5 dead bodies laying out there, and or maybe one live one, and you see a craft and you grab the craft and you take it back to wherever you take it back to, and you put your hands on it and you look inside, and you realize, oh, this is so far beyond our ken. This is so far beyond anything that we even dreamt of in our technology. And that's transformative. That's transformative on a very, very real level.
But why would they do that?
I don't know. I mean, it's like it's like a tiger, right, in a forest or in a jungle, and we shoot the tiger, right, and he sees us, and we shoot him, and and he goes down, and we go over there and put something in his ear, and and I'm sure the tiger isn't sitting there, self-reflecting. The tiger has no clue what happened to him. He just knows that something happened to him, and but he goes on with his life or her life, and off they go. Well, the same with us. I mean, why did you have your experience? I mean, I'm sure you've thought about that.
All the
Why
time.
did they do
Yeah.
it to you? Why did they
Yeah.
do it to you? And anybody in your family have experiences like that before? Was there some kind of a genetic point to all of this? I remember, my mother having, she was considered sort of a psychic, in her own way, typical Italian, Southern Italian
Yeah.
kind of thing. And my mother knew things, and she just knew things, and she would have conversations, with dead people. So it was like, holy shit, in Italian, I might add. And
Yeah.
then my wife's mother, same thing. When she was a little girl, they used to find her staring at the skies, and she always said she had a baby up there. Well, I mean, this is back in the 30s and 40s. I mean, who knows? I mean, and there's a little bit of Cherokee blood in my wife's side of her family. The Cherokee had a very robust cosmology, just like all religions, and spiritual beliefs have this sky gods, right, coming down, visiting us. The Native Americans call us the star people. I always recommend that people read RD6 Killer Clark.
Absolutely. I I don't know how it's not more out there. Absolutely fantastic work. Everybody listening, if you grab what you can and read it, please. Yeah.
Yeah, she's just wonderful. And also pick up. I know you said you had um, Keith Thompson,
Thompson, the
yeah, on
UFO.
his new book, The UFO Paradox. I read an advanced copy, and I have to tell you, very, very well worth the time. And the other one I'll give a little shout out to is Whitley Strieber's latest, called Them.
Yeah.
Wow, one of the best analyses I've ever read of the UFO issue, or the UAP issue, and abduction issue. He's brilliant. He's just a brilliant guy. Keith Thompson also. I mean, he's just a whole new perspective on things. I think he's just great. I hope he gets more involved in this down the road. Gets
I
out
hope
there.
so too, and I really hope everybody reads this book, because that's exactly the type of book I think people need to read
Yep.
to expand their aperture into different ways that we can view the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what do you think of the idea that we're potentially in some kind of non-human intelligence proxy war, that there's a number of these different non-human intelligences that are engaging with us, and we're kind of in the middle of that?
I don't know. And is it a possibility? Maybe. People always talk about that. Here's what the problem is. A lot of this information comes from people, right, who have experience, right,
Yeah.
and they're being told this, right, by the non-human intelligences. Oh, we're here, but there's also the blue avians and
Yeah.
all whites and the Nordics, and then they also see different entities. Like the entities I saw, highly unusual. It's only happened twice in history that other people have seen these particular types of entities. And then you have people that run in, like Chris Bledsoe's entities. Wow. I mean, that wasn't a tall white, but they were like translucent beings with big red eyes, and then you get the Nordics, and you get, all this, the grays, the small grays, the big grays, what Whitley calls the kobolds, with the small little, nasty looking things. And so I don't know. I mean, but these are people who see these things. So, the front page of Passport to Magonia, the cover book, the latest edition has that, Jock put the mask in front of the mask in front of the mask. So you don't really know what you're getting.
Well, and I love it. I have one of the 300 signed copies, the limited edition
Yeah,
one.
I do too. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and the caveat to that, the new cover that was originally there but was taken out because I guess it was too weird or whatever, is that there's like a shadow hand that's behind all of that. It's like the more meta kind of aspect of like, is one vast intelligence masquerading as all of them.
Yeah. I mean, when you read, like, for instance, what's this guy's book? I met him too. The neuroscientist who had the near-death experience.
Even Alexander?
Eben
Yep.
Alexander, right? Yeah. I mean, my wife had lunch with him, and we went to see him a couple of times, and we had asked him, were aliens, did you see aliens? He said, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Why wasn't it in the book? Well, my editor thought it was just wouldn't go over very well.
Yeah, I mean,
but even he said that, you don't get all the answers,
right.
when you die, when you go to the other place. You get initiated in this whole other realm, but you also know that there's other things beyond that. And Whitley Strieber talks about that too, that, the aliens don't have all the answers. They're a part of this complex web we live in, but where they actually fit in, we don't know. Are they equal to us, or are they above us, or is that type of taxonomy even worth talking about? I mean, because we're all energy forms together, right?
Yeah, and I do appreciate that kind of cosmology, and you'll see it in Vedic knowledge, and Buddhism, and Rosicrucianism, where they have these kind of, and Diana Pasulka had talked about it, and the guy, Tyler, who's the pseudonym in the book, where there's this hierarchy of entities and intelligences. Just as an example, it's like us here, and then you have like these other like non-human intelligences over here that seem physical, and then you go up further and there's like angelic beings that are non-corporeal or light being kind of things, and each form potentially more intelligent, potentially more connected to source, or however. Again, that's overly speculative, but I think that there's utility in exploring that kind of cosmology just as frames of references, just that.
We have no other way to describe it.
Right.
There's no ontology, there's no lexicon, the common lexicon that we can use. So when you describe it, you say, well, it sort of resembles a hierarchy of angels, or it sort of resembles, this one concept of, consciousness, and how, the higher your consciousness, the faster your vibrational levels are going. And, but in the end, we don't know. But the goal is really is what you're doing. You're pushing the ball forward, is pushing the ball forward to find out what are we going to find out 10 years from now, 5 years from now, next week. I don't know.
I mean, well, and I want to say something too, is that I had something akin to a near-death experience, similar to Keith Thompson. I was in a car accident. He had a drowning incident where I call it a trauma-induced out-of-body experience, because I wasn't actually near death, but during the experience, I had an awareness, and I thought I had passed away, and I had heard this angelic orchestra and all this amazing stuff, but I also came face to face with this kind of light being, which didn't seem like an alien per se, or a biological entity. It seemed like an ethereal entity, and I mean, that was a whole transformative experience that transcended space-time. I was looking down on the accident and all this stuff, and when when I consider that kind of thing, it makes me think like, wow, the UFO thing is amazing, but it's like simply one layer of something much more vast and incredible. Like the UFO, but I like the UFO thing because it's almost like a gateway to that larger reality.
Yeah, I mean, John Alexander always, posits that, the UAP, UFO, abduction experience and stuff is really, really part of a much, much larger concept. Well, he doesn't know for sure, but he said, but you have 26 types of psi, right? You have telekinesis, you have remote viewing, you have uh, telepathy, you have all different kinds of stuff, divination, and near death experiences,
Astral projection. Yeah.
astral projection. How it appears that they're all part of the same thing, right? And it's almost like Einstein was always trying to put the theory of everything together, right? And how do you fit gravity into all this and electrogravity? I'm sorry, how do you fit
Oh,
gravity into this one theory of everything? They haven't quite done it yet. But shit, I mean, you go beyond that and you say, well, how do you fit all this psi into it, all this near
yeah.
death experience, after death experiences, things along those lines? The research that's being done in University of Virginia on young kids who are having these experiences, where they actually have the mind, the memories of people that have died, 50 years before. Where the hell does that come from? And
Yeah.
there's so it's we will never have a paucity of subject areas to talk about,
Yeah.
because it's all so fascinating. If we only just realize our ignorance on a lot of this, and our arrogance in trying to solve it, and just sort of keep a cool head and a keen eye, as they would say, on this topic, and move forward in a responsible way.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm doing a presentation that's going to involve some of those things, and how where in that like non-human intelligence kind of bumps up against those things.
Sure.
Um, yeah, because I think it's fascinating because I think when you start talking about like subtle energy and your awareness starts to open to that a little, somehow this stuff comes pouring in with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the conference I met John Alexander at was a conference, it was on energy healing, and it was run by a guy he was a sociology professor from, I think, St. Joseph's University in New York or something, and William Bankston, who was able to
right.
heal
Ah, wow. Yeah,
cancer.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
So I took two of his courses. John and I were there, and we took two of his courses with some other people, and Bankston, I mean, you can't deny it. He was doing it. He was curing mice, and he was curing people of cancer. And so even today, I mean, when people call me up and they say, could you help me out? I have, somebody has a real serious disease or has cancer, and particularly if they're young and it's aggressive, and those are the easiest forms to cure, believe it or not. Um, as long as they haven't had chemo and radiation, I send them to a person that Bankston doesn't do this anymore, but I sent him to one of his acolytes who's just incredible, and she has great success. It's a nominal fee that you would pay her, but she helps. She can do it remotely and what have you, and sometimes it's been very successful. So
Yeah. So in that kind of regard, what do you think of maybe I don't want to speak too vaguely, but like the mystery schools and some of those philosophies, and maybe how that's, I don't want to say connected to, but how that could be useful or have utility in regards to studying the UFO phenomenon.
yeah, I think they all have a place. I mean, when I mean, the Greeks and the Romans, well, the Romans had a little bit different version of it, but the mystery schools that existed in Greece, the Eleusinian mystery schools, I mean, they would take you, sometimes to an island, sometimes to a cave, you know what I mean, and leave leave you in there in pitch black, but with
Yeah,
nothing
right.
for 3 days, and you'd literally die in there, sometimes mentally and psychologically, but you would come out a changed person. And that was very well hidden and very well kept because it was like an initiation ceremony. The Romans did the same thing. And then later on, well, there were other different schools too within the Greek system. what's her name? Not what's her name, there we go.
Yeah, it's blanking on me, but I know.
I'm blanking too. But anyway, I had a friend who went there about 3 years ago, and had an experience, a fascinating experience. This is a person who wasn't prone to be that kind of thing, but he was unbelievably affected by going into those caves and having his experience. But yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely essential. I think, I used to read a lot of the Western mystics. I'm reading a wonderful book, a couple wonderful books now, but one called They Flew, about uh,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
saints who would levitate, and
yeah,
it actually I'm about a third of the way through. And then I always reading about, Saint Catherine of Siena and all these other saints who would have these incredible numinous experiences, spiritual experiences where they touched something on the other side. And Diana Pasulka writes about this too.
yeah.
Writes brilliantly about it, and I love her work. And yeah, is that associated with it? I think it absolutely is, but I don't know. I don't know in what way.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wish I did. I wish I knew more. Part of me wants to, I mean, when who was it? John Alexander took Chris Bledsoe and I think Chris's daughter Emily, and they went to the Monroe Institute, and they invited me to go along, and they were doing the hemisync stuff there. And my feeling on all that stuff is it's great if you want to do it. I don't think I am personally tethered to the ground, strong enough to do that. I mean, there is a danger into getting, into really deep meditation and or doing anything with the mind, that, you can cut loose a little bit. And there are stories, not stories, there are true events that have happened with people who've done that, who really were seriously affected by it mentally. So you have to be very, very careful going into that, and know yourself a little bit and be grounded. I don't consider myself grounded all that well, but there are some people. I think Chris Bledsoe is an excellent person because he's grounded, extraordinarily grounded. Yeah, and a lovely man to boot. Have you ever met him?
I've spoken to him a number of times. I haven't met him yet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you ever meet him, you will see right away. He's just really one of the true, genuine, gentleman, loving, caring, compassionate souls. And I'm very, very fond of him and his family. Yeah.
And what I mean, how did you end up finding him?
Uh, through a friend of ours, a mutual friend, Larry Fraschella. Larry he's a businessman up in Pennsylvania. He and his brother, they're really a pair, boy, I'll tell you. And I don't know if he's dealing with, I think he's in a Rudolf Steiner now, but he's an extraordinarily bright guy too, but a wealthy businessman. And he got to know John Alexander pretty well. And I met him through John Alexander, but he was also involved with Chris Bledsoe, helping Chris out because Chris was going through a terrible, terrible time, with his family, and his local community didn't believe him and all that kind of stuff. So eventually I went down and visited. Actually, Larry brought us together in New York, where Chris's family came and my wife and I came, and John was there, and Larry was there, and wow, we had about a 2 or 3 hour conversation in a conference room where we let go. I mean, both sides, and there was a lot of tears and there was a lot of emotion because he was going through a terrible time, and his wife, because she didn't understand it, and it turned out that his wife had some experiences also, and it sort of settled matters for the family. I think helped the family quite a bit. It helped us quite a bit, my wife and I, and we became very close after that. It was very emotional, and it came very close after that. And then I went down to visit him. And in the book, he talks about me going down there and talking to his children about it, and some of the community members who were giving him trouble about it, and I just sort of let him know, you're talking to a guy here who's had an incredible experience, and it's a true experience and has happened before. There's a lot of, historical information backing him up. And I can tell you, that he he's one of the most interesting cases I've ever run into of person with an abduction scenario. And I mean, it's endlessly fascinating. And I hope he writes another book about it, because he told half the story, I think, and there's a lot more going on. He also helped a dear friend of mine heal a young kid. You know, he has Chris has some abilities he got out of that, and he uses those. And so, you know, bless him. You know.
Yeah. Well, I know you can't speak on Chris's behalf, but what are your own thoughts on the lady?
Oh, the lady's fascinating. I don't know. There was a book, a wonderful book. God, I wish the hell I knew where the hell maybe it was called The Mojave Incident.
Right. Yeah. That is a book, right?
Yeah, that's, you got to read that book. Well, the lady appears in that scenario too. And where this couple, you know, is out, and they had experiences before, both of them. They didn't really realize it, but anyway, they're out camping. They were gotten married or something, and sure enough, out of the sky, you know, the middle of frickin' nowhere, and out of the sky, you know, they see all these lights, and it turns out to be, you know, hundreds of these or dozens of these UFOs, and they circle their truck. And so they get into the back of their truck. The guy has a shotgun or a gun, wanting to defend himself and to defend his wife. And the truck eventually comes up into the air, and they have all these big grays, and these little kobolds, you know, as Strieber calls them, little nasty looking things, and you know, circling. They scare them half to death. And as they're going in, and they're being lifted into this huge UFO. But while they're doing that, the lady appears out of nowhere. And she says, "Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. You're going to be okay." And then she sort of disappears. Well, this is the same lady, you know, same description as what Chris saw, same description as what, you know, what Fatima,
Yeah.
Medjugorje, Lords. I mean, you know, and a lot of times a lady never announces herself as the Blessed Virgin Mary. She just basically says, you know, "I'm the lady." And, you know, and what does she do? She, you know, like she did in Fatima, she told him terrible tales, you know, of war and destruction and what have you, and how things have got to change, and things along those lines. Pretty much what, you know, the Greys and other entities tell people nowadays during abduction experiences.
I mean, you think that's just one facade of the phenomenon, or you think it's something else?
No, I think it's just, I think it's part of the phenomenon. It just, you know, it's you know, one of those masks, you know, that comes out. I mean, it's a little 3.5 foot blonde with blue eyes, and, you know, dressed like you know, a virgin. You know what I mean? That's not the Blessed Virgin Mary. The Blessed Virgin Mary, I doubt very much, was blonde and blue eyed. You know, she was probably short, but she probably wasn't that short. But she probably had dark hair and dark eyes, as being Jewish, right? She's so you know, I don't know where to put it. Don't know where to place it. This is the fascinating thing about it. And you have all these symbols, and essentially this is what they amount to: symbols, you know, symbols of the gray, you know, the tall whites, you know, all these other things, and you sort of put them together, and you don't know how to make sense of it. I mean, you know, how do you make sense of all that? And the only thing we can rely on is science, and science has no answers for it. And then, you know, religion has, I think, much more answers to it, you know, saying, well, at least more background information on it. But and then social anthropologists, you know, who have a lot of information on it because they've seen it, right? And they know, you know, the virgin birth and the virgin mother, you know, is a leitmotif that runs through, you know, cultures, all different kinds of cultures.
Right.
You know, Jesus, you know, the idea of Jesus is pretty close to Mithra and a lot of other, you know, savior type figures that appeared throughout different religions and cultures throughout history. So, you know, the Catholic religion or the Christian religion is really an offshoot, you know, of you know, previous religions, you know, before that, which doesn't make it, you know, bad or good or anything. It just, that's just what it is. I mean, you know, so, and they borrowed a lot, you know, they borrowed a lot from the pagans, you know, and that's okay. You know, it's just, if you believe in the message, you can't, you know, the message of the New Testament in particular, you know, it's a very positive one, and an enlightening and an uplifting one. Old Testament, I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
That's There's some wackadoodle stuff in there. Yeah, right.
But I mean, do you think if we have these allegedly have possession of these crafts and bodies of these different entities, that we have some answers?
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, we know it. We know it's real. We know it's very real. I mean, people ask me this all the time. Is it real? I go, absolutely.
But do you think
100%.
any of those, like, just say the bodies, right? Do you think any of those are actually any true forms, or they're just like a surrogate of
Well,
some
I mean,
kind?
you don't really know. I mean, you don't really know. You can't look into their minds. I mean, they have what we would consider to be brains, but we don't know how they function. Um, I mean, initially you thought, well, these are, they're from another planet or what have you. But, I think the going belief now is that they're actually sort of biological robots and they represent something. Are they probes from another dimension? Are they probes from another planet, from another solar system, from another time, space continuum? I don't know. And would they ever tell us? I mean, I always get a big kick out of when Fermi's famous quotation, where are they? Where are they?
Yeah.
Talk about it, where are they? Well, and then there's, the dark forest hypotheses, which makes a lot of sense. And the guy mentions this in I can't remember his name, the Chinese author mentions it in the three body problem. Well, the universe has been around for a long time. And if you're a civilization in the universe, you may have learned the lesson that you don't announce yourself. You never announce yourself.
Yeah.
Because announcing yourself is basically what happens in the three body problem, right?
Right.
Earth announces itself and you get people here coming to take you over and kill everybody. So they call it the dark forest hypothesis because you just stay
That
quiet.
means we got to get national security to do something about the SETI project.
Oh shit. Well, yeah, the SETI
We're
project,
toast.
but even worse, it's television. I mean, I Love
Yeah,
Lucy.
right.
Friends have been
Radio. Yeah.
running probably into another solar system by now, and God knows what people think. What these other entities are looking at, them, what the hell is this? And or even worse, some of these reality TV shows, so
Yeah. Well, Jim, it's been great talking to you. Yeah, I could talk to you all day easily. We got to do this again sometime. But for people watching and listening, what can they expect upcoming from To the Stars?
Well, we have a movie out now. Monsters of California is a great movie. Tom directed it. We have a movie in production, we hope, from Legendary Pictures on the Secret Machines franchise. We have a cartoon, had nothing to do with UFOs, that Tubi, I believe, bought, called Breaking Bear. Takeoff on Breaking Bad. And it's an animated series. Well, I'm looking forward to that. It's supposed to be hilarious. So the animation's in process. We have probably about a half a dozen other movie projects and television projects that we're working on. I've been talking to some actors, some well-known actors and producers and writers. So I like to, working with Hollywood has been an eye opener for me. I just didn't realize how complicated it is to get anything done. But we have a lot of these projects in line. We sold a couple ideas already to streaming services, and we're just waiting to get scripts written, things along those lines. One of our founders, I'm not founders, but one of our board members, Stan Spry, owns Cartel Entertainment, and they do tons of movies. They do the Creep Show on TV and all this kind of stuff. He's been enormously helpful for us, and making contacts. And Tom has his own contacts and stuff like that. So, I mean, I'm helping in the background more or less, but I don't live out there, so I can't.
Yeah.
I'm not there on
Yeah.
time. Tom's on tour right now, so
Yeah. And you guys just had Trinity release, and
yeah, we just had Trinity. Oh yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah, just Trinity, and then we have the new Peter Levenda, Tom DeLonge book coming out. God's Man of War is coming out. And then we're going to have probably the third in the trilogy, Secret Machines trilogy, coming out, but I'm not 100% sure when that's going to happen yet.
yeah.
But we got it all coming out. Simon and Schuster in concert with To the Stars are putting those out. So
Yeah. And so just for clarity, also, you have the Secret Machines War that's coming out in September with Peter Levenda, and then the third volume of the fiction series of the Secret Machines fiction series with AJ Hartley, and I'm looking forward to both of them. I have to say that the Secret Machines War, the third volume of the nonfiction series, is such a highly anticipated book. With Peter Levenda, and I'm going to have him on soon. I can't wait to discuss that with him, because that it's an excellent series, and it goes over so many different things, and I'm really looking forward to this book kind of bringing everything home.
Yeah, Peter's absolutely brilliant, and I promise you, I've read War, the manuscript, and it lives up to the expectations, and then some. So
Yeah,
matter of fact, I was talking with Peter about, can we do a condensed version of it? You know what I mean? Like this, because this is, I mean, the reason why Peter wrote these is this is what TTS believes. I mean, this is our optic on the phenomenon. This is what we basically, and I think Peter just did a marvelous job with it. So, and
yeah.
AJ too, he's just a brilliant writer. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there was a rumor of two different things. So I don't know if it's true or not. Something about like either like an autobiography or some kind of biography on Hal Puthoff, some kind of
Yeah, we
project
have
like
that.
that.
We actually were working on that, and there's a name. I can't get into too many details because there's a showrunner who's been attached to it, and they get all upset when you start talking about it. But yeah, we're doing something along those lines. Yes.
And then something, maybe there was an app that was going to come out that was like a remote viewing thing. Is that something?
Yes.
Or
Yes, that's another one, and that's more along and more progressing along, and we have a writer for that, and that's moving along swimmingly. So it's the thing in Hollywood, when you're dealing with all this stuff. I mean, it's like these books get written with the hope that they're going to be either a documentary attached to it, a movie attached to it, or
yeah,
a series attached to it. So they're all sort of done together, and so we're looking at that. And as people explain to me, Hollywood or LA has changed so much in the last few years, and it's streaming services sort of run everything, right? And
yeah,
they're interested only in certain things, and sometimes in concert with one another. So and working all that out, it's just
yeah. So I'm highly anticipating those, and I always like the Secret Machines. I have the hardcover, and then I always get the digital Kindle version. So I have
yeah, that's
something
what I
like
do.
on hand all the time that I can highlight in, because I never highlight in my books. Uh, so I'm looking forward to those. One other question I meant to ask you, and I forgot to ask you during the interview. Are you familiar with the Scott Andrews story?
Say that again. Is
Scott Andrews.
Scott
Lou,
Andrews?
yeah.
No.
So Lou commented about it. It was like a Simon and Schuster book project thing about this guy who was in the Air Force, who was he was he was brought in without, like,
Oh, the
from a
guy who
young.
talks to the aliens.
I don't know what he was recruited. He had like Havana syndrome type effects, and then all of these like psi functions or psychic functions started coming online after these Havana syndrome type effects. And then he found out through some of his records that the Air Force was taking him from a young age, and he had no memory of it.
Oh, yes, I've heard of that. This is that whole. There's a couple people, Corey Good, and then there's another fellow, an attorney had claimed the same thing, and now Scott Andrews. This idea that there's a secret space thing going on. It was an Ender's Game, was a movie that was based
I remember
on.
Ender's Game. That was a good, actually good movie. Yeah.
And
Book.
it
Yeah.
was based on it, loosely based on it, but where they taking these young kids at 7 years old and then putting them into these programs, and then they would, because of their acuity with the video games and all this kind of stuff, and they would be able to basically pilot craft and do all kind of stuff, and they would be trained. extraordinarily far-fetched for me.
For some reason, yeah, Simon and Schuster, I believe it's them, or forgive me if it's another company. Like they grabbed onto the contract or the book, whatever, and they
Yeah,
have it. And
that's right. And you know, I have to look. You know, again, I don't like to dismiss things.
right,
That,
allegedly, what's interesting about this is the guy has some kind of documentation, and hopefully that's revealed in the book. Otherwise, it's just another story.
yeah,
But
and
Lou made a statement about something that there's more reality to that story than initially meets the eye. I
well,
don't,
Lou would know. But you know, I'll be honest with you. I haven't really delved too far into stuff like that.
yeah.
You
Do
know,
you know? Do you know anything about Lou's upcoming book?
well, I know it's coming out really soon. I just got an email today. You
I
know,
got it too. Yeah,
you got it too. Yeah. So, I know he's just so busy. I'm in a
yeah,
conversation with him, but he's, you know, now, and he's just overwhelmed, I think, and with all this stuff because coming out. So, um, I also haven't seen him. I'm on an email list with him. We go
yeah.
back and forth. So I haven't seen him contributing lately, and he usually contributes. So,
Have you read the book?
imminent. No, I have not. And
Yeah.
hope he doesn't trash me in the book. That's what I'm. You never know. You never know what about those
No,
military guys,
no.
right? I'm just kidding. He's a good man. I mean, he's a good. He went through all kinds of hell, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I hope he expands on the book or speaks to and Skinwalkers in the Pentagon where they made a reference to him regarding remote viewing.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to his story. You know, and he's been very good about keeping things to himself about some things that about the story and about the program itself, and I think he felt obligated to do that. And he's what I like about him and I admire him for is he's like Grush. He follows the guidelines. He doesn't release he's hadn't publicly released any classified information and he could have
Yeah.
I mean, I saw some of the stuff when I was chatting with him in his office and with his people that work with him, and pretty compelling.
I mean, I was gonna say, is some of the stuff is it like a smoking gun kind of thing? Is it like really,
It's kind of stuff that I don't think it would be briefed to most congressmen because they don't have the clearances for it. But I think it has been briefed to probably other ones who have, maybe on the intel committees who have the top secret clearances. So, I mean, it's one of those things, when I think this is what set Lou off a little bit. It was like, this is so obviously real. And why aren't you doing anything about? Why aren't we doing anything about this? Why are we doing anything about it? He's trying, and he just got to the point where he just said, "Well, this is ridiculous. This has got to go out." And then, when he met Chris Mellon, and I met Chris too. I'd never known him before. Then Chris came to visit me, and we had a long discussion. And I think Chris was really taken aback because Chris is in charge of all these special access programs, and the regular special access programs, the unacknowledged and the waived unacknowledged. I mean, he had the book. I mean, he was the guy.
yeah.
He didn't know about it. And that was, I think, unsettling for him and for Lou too. I mean, it was like, why was this being held back? And I know why. And it was being run out of a different place, essentially what it was.
Yeah.
And they don't like, when you're in the government, if you're what Mr. Trump calls the deep state, I disagree with him on this. I think the deep state is a really fine government employees who've been there for a long time who really know the territory. I understand his point to a certain extent, but by and large, this is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. But I think the deep state or these long-term public servants sort of control this to a certain extent, and when they see people coming in and out of government, right? Politicians or people that are just appointed and you're there for 3 years and then you leave. I mean, we in the intelligence business, we're conducting an operation. You want to keep an operation secure. You're always looking at points of failure. Well, everybody who knows about that is a point of failure, right? Because that's always somebody you have to worry about. Is that person at some point in his or her life going to, tell, and let it become public. So you always are very, very careful who you discuss and what you discuss. And I'm sure some presidents were even told, the basic story, but weren't told everything.
What do you think the basic story is? That there's
Basic
another
story is
intelligence there?
yeah. I mean, it's very basic. It's another intelligence. We met them. We don't know much about them. We have craft. They're located here. These are some of the organizations that are working on it. This is the main organization. These are defense contractors that are dealing with it. And it goes just about that far.
When you said we met them, is it like, is that,
was that
you said we met them? Is that like the Holloman Air Force landing event?
similar to that? Yeah, probably.
Do you think there was a meeting like that?
I think there was.
Yeah.
I'm speaking hypothetically.
Yeah. And hypothetically, what is that like how an agreement or an arrangement would be met?
I would assume that's the case.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, one more question is just why, yeah, some people report during some experiences that there's military or human personnel there aside non-human intelligences.
Yes, that's another strange. I mean, Whitley Strieber always tells this story. It's in one of his books, and I can't remember. I think it's in Communion or maybe the book after Communion, where he mentions he had a friend in the CIA, and when he was to bed, they were in the cabin, and he and his wife, and he had Grays come into the room, and then he had two people, a man and a woman, I think, who pinned him to the bed, and they grabbed his ear and they put the piece in his ear, right? The implant in his ear. And, they pressed it in there. And as he was looking, he saw his friend from the CIA also in the room. And so when the experience is over with, he gets his wife and tells his wife what happened. And he said, and I can't remember the guy's name. He said, I think his name was Dennis, but I could be wrong. And he said he was in the room. So he calls his buddy from the agency and he finds out the guy had died 6 months, earlier. So, and this goes back to MILAB, right? Military abductions. I mean, people see people in military outfits, and what have you. And, I mean, I had the experience of a helicopter flying over my house before this happened.
Did you?
Lot. Yes. Now, I also had Fort Belvoir 5 miles down the road, but what was strange was I couldn't see the helicopter at all. I mean, it was loud, and none of my neighbors even heard it.
Yeah.
But it was so damn loud. I mean, how could you not hear it? Nobody else heard it.
Yeah, because Terry Lovelace also, Terry Lovelace described seeing humans during his experience.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about that was that it was by an Air Force base.
Yeah.
I mean, but you have this apparent alleged non-human craft, and he has this experience with one of his buddies, and they both had the experience, and they tried to separate them, or they did separate them after the experience, and the Air Force Office of Special Investigations interrogated them, asked them, what'd you know, what'd you see? And they seemed to be aware of his contact event somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, AFOSI, they have a special branch associated with them too. And I think that's probably where a lot of this stuff lies. But any intelligence organization is going to try to gather as much intelligence on something they don't understand because they have to get their hands around it, right? And there's a paucity of information regarding this topic. So if you have somebody, you run into somebody, particularly if they work in the same organization you have, I mean, you're going to go out of your way to grab this person and say, what did you experience? Exactly what happened. And then you're going to tell them to shut the hell up about it because because all you're going to do is cause trouble, right? And I mean, because somebody finds out on the outside, a newspaper reporter's going to be here. We have no answers. You know what I mean? All we do is get. I mean, it's the biggest hot potato in government. Trust me.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why nobody wants to identify where this thing is located and who's doing it, because
So, and yeah. And is there another idea that, like, okay, somebody has a genuine non-human intelligence interaction, and it's not the non-human intelligence that gives them the implant, but it's some kind of human faction that gives them the implant so the humans can track them to see what's going on with their non-human intelligence interaction?
you know, that's the sinister element that might be involved in this. But once again, you go back to the masks, right? And the
Right.
trickster element that's very, very common in this. Do they basically make you see, human
Right.
beings involved in it to sort of, for whatever reason they want to do that? They want
Confuse you, or
to
who knows? Yeah.
confuse you, or maybe even,
Make you feel more comfortable.
make
Yeah.
you feel more comfortable. Or is it true? I mean, do we
Right.
have a special organization? I like to point out, the people who tell me that, like the Air Force taking young kids and moving them out and into these space programs and stuff. The logistical
Well,
for that, yeah, alone is
when it comes
yeah.
to that, I mean, a suspicion that I have is that there's some kind of real element to that. And I kind of like made my own distinction and calling it the classified space program versus the secret space program, where there's some kind of true element where something is going on, right? Who knows how much? Because what happens is you have somebody come out with some kind of shenanigan story to dump mud over the whole thing, to cover the whole thing. Because you say that's bullshit, that's ridiculous, because what they're hiding is really a little bit a more modest version of it. But now you don't know the difference because you have
Well,
X, Y, and
but that kind of thinking, though, that's, I mean, that's, that you get into conspiracy thinking really, really quickly along those lines.
correct. Right.
And but and it's a very, very common thing that's for humans to do. I remember I had an Iranian I was speaking with years ago in the agency, and he was trying to convince me that Ayatollah Khomeini, was actually a CIA asset. And I said, he was recruited in Paris and all this kind of stuff. And I said, he is inimical to CIA aspirations. I said, no, he could not in a million years possibly be a CIA asset.
So
Guy says, "Oh no, this is Russia has that paranoid, conspiratorial. Oh no, that's what makes it so good. That whatever is expected, so therefore it must be true." And you lock yourself up into this magical thinking, this circular reasoning, and
so that's the kind of thing, right? Would foreign intelligence services implant conspiracies, even UFO ones within the United States or whatever, or in the lore, in the communities, whatever, to confuse the whole thing?
Absolutely. And that's why the government, in the 40s were very concerned about this coming out, because they thought the Russians would take advantage of it and create disinformation programs, in a country that was relatively agrarian at the time, and with really lousy telecommunication systems. It would cause a lot of problems. The Russians, disinformatia, they've been doing this, for God, since the Czechists. I mean, back in the 18th, these guys are great at this, right? And they interfered in our elections. They have been interfering in our elections. They're going to interfere in the 2024 elections. And it doesn't even matter which side they're interfering with, right? I mean, they just want to create chaos. And that's what they do. And all intelligence services, to a certain extent, will do a little bit of that. The Russians are beyond the pale. So the idea that they would create these kind of themes or memes, on the internet, pointing to this or that regarding UFOs and, to confuse the issue. Absolutely. Absolutely.
How could somebody have any clarity on what could be real then with all this information overload?
You can't. You really can't. And that's really one of the main problems with this. And this is why so many scientists who are involved in this get upset and really want to rein things in, so because you don't want to it's like I know some of my friends who are heavily involved in this, former government types, but they won't get into the abduction thing and they won't talk about that because that's almost too woo-woo, and I get it. I get it. I mean, it's like you don't want to overwhelm people, you don't want to say, hey, there's intelligence life out there. And yeah, we have downcraft and yeah, they're here. And you can tell them this basic story and they can look at you and go, well, the bubble over their head is it might be true, it might not be true, but it doesn't affect me. And I'm going to go home and, and do what I do. But when you start getting into the problems of abduction and non-human intelligence is coming into your room, maybe harming you, harming your family members. As one person said to me, whom I respect very, very much, he's, when we started doing this with To the Stars, he said, why do you want to start scaring 7-year-olds? And it really hit me because, I thought about that and I said, once you start talking about this, it's not just 30-year-olds reading this, it's going to be 19-year-olds and it's going to be 7-year-old and 10-year-olds who are hearing about it. And they get scared, particularly if they see, the movies and TVs, and then they hear somebody saying, no, it's actually real and blah, 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 blah. I had a friend of mine who told me that, her daughter wanted to talk to me. This is when I was working as a contractor at DHC. Her daughter was 14 years old and she wanted to know all about UFOs. And I told her, I said, I can't do that. She's too young. And I said, this is not an ET kind of thing where, you just say, oh, it's this cute little thing, and it'll do this and it'll do that and has all these magical powers and they're very lovely. I said, this isn't the case. And I said, as she gets after the third or fourth question, I said, it's going to get serious. And I said, at 14 years old, their prefrontal cortex isn't even close to being developed.
Right. Yeah.
And I said, that doesn't really happen until you're in your mid to late 20s. And I said, I'm not going to be responsible for putting ideas into people's heads that are just, problematic, could be very problematic, particularly for a young person who isn't quite tethered, and they have their other problems. I don't know that. And it's like that young girl, they believed in, remember Slender Man?
Yeah.
And she ended up stabbing the other girl. And, it was like, it was a made up thing, but they just got totally involved in it. And it's like a cult, people get involved in cults.
But isn't that why the transparency is important? Or you think it's going to add fuel to the fire?
Well, transparency, I said, for reasonable
Confirmation.
people,
yeah,
for reasonable people who can live with ambiguity, I would say, yeah, this is a great thing. But there are lots and lots of people out there that cannot handle.
Well, because there's the idea of like, okay, you tell the people that the Earth is a sphere, they're going to panic and think they're going to fall off. It's
yeah. So I mean,
I think in the long run, we're going to look back and say, like, of course we should have told everybody because it's just the right thing to do.
Maybe, but once again, this has been held as a secret since the mid to late 40s until now. And then you have to ask yourself, what is it that's preventing decent people in the government who are involved in this, honest people, good people, from saying anything about it? That's what like I said, I'm maybe at the 3,000 foot level, but I'm not at that 10,000 foot.
I always question that. And I always think, I don't think they're just like, oh, I need to hold this, like I'm sure there are reasons, right? But it seems like
it's a conundrum because, and on one side of it, you say, well, they're trying to protect us. On the other side of it, you say, what are you protecting us from? It's already here.
Right.
And we've already experienced it. So it's like, you're not telling me. That's why if somebody told me you can't talk about this anymore, I'd say, well, screw you. I mean,
yeah,
it didn't happen to you. It happened to me. It happened to my wife. I got an issue with this, and I'm going to talk about it. And the reason why I do talk about it. But at the same time, I understand the viewpoint, their viewpoint, that maybe this isn't the best thing to be doing at this isn't the time. You know, when that time,
It's never the time though. That's the
well,
thing.
again, it's a moral and it's an ethical issue to me. And, and I see both sides. Really lean towards the transparency side and lean towards letting it all out and see what happens, and then, we'll have to just deal with it. Um, but I lean that way. But at the same time, I have consideration for the other side who are saying, and I know some of these people, and they're good people, honest people, and
Yeah.
I have a very, very strong
Some of the
belief.
people that are on that level.
Yep. And I have a very, very strong belief in our system of government and our civil service. And I don't believe these people are bad people. I believe they're very, very good people. I never really, really met an awful person in government. And I've worked with all different types from all different agencies in the military. I mean, some of them, were off the wall or something like that, but very, very few. Most of them are extraordinarily hardworking and very, very bright people who really just wanted to do the right thing all the time. And that's my belief in government. That's my feeling about government. And I feel extraordinarily strongly about that. And so when I look at that, people say, oh, it's a cabal and this, that. Well, you're gonna have to prove that to me. You're gonna have to show me how that's the case. I said, because I don't see that. I work with private industry too, quite a bit on a very intimate level with private industry on some things that we did together, and I never found that at all. I just found them to be honest people, and good people.
Yeah.
American
And
publics, yeah.
the rumors of like reverse engineer technology, they say, oh, well, they haven't gotten anywhere with it because they can't, because it's so siloed. But then there's also, in Secret Machines, Tom and AJ Hartley are talking about these triangles that we have.
There's a possibility that both things are true at this
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's fascinating. And I think sometimes people think too black and white, like, oh, it could be that some technologies are inspired. Maybe they're not doing the exact same thing, but we could still adapt it and make something pretty incredible.
Yeah. And don't forget too, you can learn a lot just from looking at something and
Yeah.
thinking, cogitating, as they would say, and saying, how the
Yeah.
heck did they do that?
Isn't that
And
what OSAP was doing?
yeah, I mean, actually, ATIP was doing it. OSAP was doing it. OSAP more so, and with Bigelow, Bass, the Bass program. I mean, that's essentially what they were doing. They were basically, they hired Bob Bigelow's firm, and and Colm, and John, and Kit, and all these really sharp people, and Eric Davis, and they had them all, and Hal, they had them all in there, and they were saying, okay, what could we gain from, what knowledge can we gain from this? So it's interesting. You can learn a lot by what you don't know, and saying, okay, what doesn't fit this paradigm, doesn't fit this scientific paradigm. It has to be, maybe this is where we should be looking, and over there. So you go to that side and you run that system as far as you can take it, and maybe you hit a brick wall, maybe you don't, but maybe you learn something. So.
Yeah. And do you think that, I mean, you might not know this, right? That, Tom's initial advisors, he had an initial set of advisors, and I guess that kind of, you know, the WikiLeaks thing happened, and then he had to get different advisors. Do you think that the initial advisors are still helping in any way?
Helping Tom.
Yeah, helping the transparency issue at all.
Now, these initial advisors are they're they were separate. They may have been involved. Some of them may be still involved. The interesting thing about them was I only knew Tom to this day refuses to tell me, most of them. I mean, I knew three of them. I guess two. He still won't confirm that, but I know who they were. But the three of them that came out, from the WikiLeaks thing. But these advisors, I mean, when Tom and I first started talking, Tom would get me on the phone and he he was telling me, okay, this is what they're telling me. And what they were doing was talking around the subject,
Yeah.
not providing him with classified information, but providing him with like examples, like, you know, and sort of creating stories for him. And maybe they shouldn't have done that with Tom, because Tom, you know,
I know. Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
really, really good and he's smart and he
Yeah.
put it together. And
Yeah.
that's how I ended up meeting him, because he scared the shit out of some people. And you know, with the Secret Machines, the first one.
The
And
Chasing Shadows.
yep. And that's how I met him. And to make sure that, you know, there were no leaks. And and after meeting him and having a conversation with him, I realized that that wasn't the case, and his advisors weren't doing that. What his advisors were doing was were if you're going to tell this story, you want to tell it this way, and because this is the story, but probably resembles more the truth than anything else. And of course, Tom is very well read on the topic, so he just put two and two together, and then he came up with what he came up with.
What do you make of the in that book, like the Project Paperclip aspect of it?
Uh, no question in my mind that you know, Dave Grush mentions, you know, the UFO incident in 33 in Italy, and you know, which was real, and you know, and then I mean, the Germans were clearly experimenting with, they call the Bell, you know, and they were experimenting with that type of technology. Um, there are a lot of loose ends there, so I don't think anybody knows for sure. But when we brought these paperclip people over, these incredibly awful people for the most part, you know, just devoted Nazis. You know, and I don't think most of them, even Werner von Braun, you know, he was a Nazi. He was responsible for more fucking war crimes. You know, thousands of people died under his watch to develop when he was developing the V2. But yet he was a father of the Apollo program, right? So but they came over with an extraordinary amount of knowledge on things that we didn't know, because we weren't experimenting on human beings, and you know, and we weren't doing other types of research, and that's why they brought him over, because the people in the Army, in particular in the Air Force, realized, well, it was the Army at the time, Army Air Corps, realized that these people had incredible amount of knowledge that if we didn't take it, the Russians would get. So you brought these awful people over, including some Japanese. And so, you know, our biological weapons program became more enhanced. Aviation program became more enhanced, and on a variety of levels. On our space program, um, we had a decent space program, but we didn't have the knowledge of rocketry that they had, nor did we have any of the data concerning high altitude effects on the human body. That was all brought over by, you know, the Germans, who experimented on concentration camp people. It's a sordid
Yeah.
story.
Well, because
It really, really
in the
is.
Secret Machines, there's a kind of major theme of that, that you know had some of them working on the UAP program and stuff,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I mean, you know, this goes back a while. You know, we have one, TTS is working on a story now. I can't get into too much detail, but basically based on how that began and where it went to after the war in South America, and then who got involved and how it got
is that
transplanted.
going to be fiction or nonfiction story?
Uh,
Or or
it'll have to be fiction.
I'm really looking forward to that. Is there anything else you can tell us about that?
No,
Yeah,
no.
that sounds like a really good one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we have some people that are writing up I wrote up a little bit on it, you know, and then Tom took it, and then we're running with it now. So we've been
yeah,
running with it for a while, actually, but it just takes a while to get, you know, the right
yeah.
people. Yeah.
Well, I had you on so long, Jim, and I hate
Holy
to take up
cow!
so much
Yeah.
of your time. Yeah, but it's always an honor talking to you. Again, I could do this all day. I gotta have you on again at some point. I talked to you about something before that I want to do. I know whoever else is down for that, so I think we should do it maybe in a few
Okay.
months.
Okay.
But what would be your parting words? Like, we talked so much in this conversation, right? Non-human intelligence, human potential, technology, is the world ready for this? All these obstacles and potentials. So what are some words that you want to leave with people amidst all this information?
Well, it's real. It exists. We live with it. And I think if you're interested in it, be careful a little bit. Know your limitations as how far you want to get into this. It is a rabbit hole and it's very frustrating, but it's also extraordinarily fascinating. And that if you are involved in this, you should see yourself as a fellow traveler and someone who's really on the cutting edge of something that might show itself in the near future. So I say fair forward, quoting T.S. Eliot again, but fair forward, Voyager. I mean, go ahead, keep doing it. And don't believe everything you hear. And but at the same time, you'll get the true story out of it. It'll come to you. The true story's out there. Somebody asked me about disclosure once, and I said, it's happened.
Yeah.
It's happened. And they said, well, how? And I said, trust me, it is out there. And it's out there in the hundreds and hundreds of books that I have. It's all in there. But I can't tell you which ones, are the ones that are more true as opposed to ones that are less true. But nevertheless, it's already
Why
out.
can't you, Jim? Come on.
Yeah. Well, it's not my place. It
Yeah,
really
yeah,
is
yeah.
not my place.
Yeah.
And but it is true. And
Yeah.
So, but again, it's a dangerous topic in a sense that, dangerous in the sense you have to be careful how you handle it. Don't believe everything you hear. And, but at the same time, keep an open mind.
Yeah. Well, again,
And
thank you
thank
so
you very,
much.
very much, by the way, for listening to my monotonous voice over this, over this time period here.
No,
I don't like doing these podcasts because I always end up repeating myself over and over and over again because there's only so much I can say.
no,
And
there's a lot of stuff that's new here, and I always appreciate and honor your time. So, again, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure and an honor talking with you.
all right, buddy. Well, we'll see each other again, I'm sure.
Yes, sir. You take
All
care.
right. Thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
Jim.